And the space. So we've got a few things in play that have led to our demographics as we see them today within our schools. So what is the makeup of those demographics? And what I mean by nested, I mean, for example, at Farwell, we have our functional life skills program. Elementary students throughout the district who are in functional life skills programming. One of the places they will be attending school is Farwell. They've got a section of a wing where that's the work that they do and the support services for it. McMahon has our elementary school day treatment program. And so students from throughout the district, they go to that program. The reason I bring these up is it creates physical space within schools being used for specialized programs. And some of these programs are special, obviously they're specialized, but they're so specialized for specific students that there are not the same numbers of students attending what would otherwise be that space usage. For example, if you went to a classroom at typical times, you might see 20, 25 kids in a class, that's their class. In these specialized programs, you can see much smaller numbers, and they're coming from around the district. So in 2015, when the initial process was being reviewed to figure out the enrollments for Connors Elementary School, it brought up a larger context or question within the community, and there was, I would say, a lot of discussion around what to do. And ultimately, what happened is the superintendent at the time was doing work with the specialized programs, with a new school coming online, with Martell no longer being in service. So we had a new bigger school, but we had less schools, if you will. And so efforts were made to try to strike a balance. And one way to do that was to identify the students who had that kind of need in what we call out-of-district placements. And in this context, I'll share that my second point here, that out-of-district in this conversation is referring to a designated zone that is geographical that dictates, larger part, where students attend their elementary school. Of course, at the middle and high school, it becomes irrelevant because those schools receive students from all the elementary schools. So right now, there's no district policy to guide or govern out-of-district placements. There's some language in the Department of Education that says each school district must do certain things. Some of that out-of-district placement conversation is not about school to school within your district, but about one example. I had one come in today. Student has been attending Woodlow High School. They just moved. They'd like to finish high school there this year and then come to Lewiston next year. I talked with the superintendent about those kinds of things. That's also labeled an out-of-district placement. And we try to make sure that the student's educational need can be met, and we make those agreements. It impacts enrollments and things of that nature, so we're smart about it. But as we dug deeper, we found that the out-of-district placements that are happening school to school within our district, that there's actually a lot of them. And they range in purpose or in need. They range from, this is where my child goes to daycare. They range from, this is where my child's grandparents live, and I drop them off there before I travel elsewhere to work. I can't get back in time to pick them up. So they go to and from school from their grandparents' house. It works well for the family. And then there are others that can be more of a challenge. One example is I want my students to go to this school because that's where their best friend goes. And so we have those things, but what we're discovering over time, this actually got brought to us a little more this fall, when we were trying to plan for pandemic purposes for the hybrid cohorts. And our transportation team was saying, okay, I got to break this down and figure out how we minimize our runs so we can get all the kids to school because we're short drivers. And then they would seeing these things pop up that had been recurring over time. And by recurring over time, I mean someone went to school A as a first grader on a superintendent's agreement to go out of district. They should have been at school B, but they go to school A. But now they're in sixth grade and they've been going there for 5 years. And so the conversation got sticky with, well, if we're narrowing these runs, we can't pick up these kids from all over the place and get them to that school. So we looked at the out-of-district placement, which I'm gonna get into in a few minutes. I'll show you visually and try to explain it. But the form itself has some pretty significant gaps in its language, and I want to take some time to that a little. So looking at the map, just so you know, I chunked this out so it's not so big, but this is the city of Lewiston, and you can see to the top left that darker pointy shaded area is No Name Pond, and you have to the southern part where the orange area is, that bigger section that goes through that kind of darker line. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Oh, yeah, you can. This section here is 95, to give you an idea of where we're at. So these districts are essentially on a map the makeup of the elementary school. So within the Geiger district, you have this very large area here, and then as it comes in towards the downtown, you can see it break off. And this is probably hard to see for viewers at home, but you have Campus Ave here that comes across the LMS school, middle school to the left-hand side. So that's what this neighborhood is. This longer road here is Sabbath Street, and you can see how that branches off. And before I change slides, I guess I want to make note that you can see how there's splits in this as you get down to the smaller neighborhoods. But this light blue section that's right in the middle to the bottom right of our screen, they go across students who go to Geiger to go to Montello. Just wanted you to see that on the map. The Montello district, as you can see, has that same light blue we just mentioned at the bottom of the screen, and that extends down here to the very bottom middle and over to the right. In and around and behind Geiger School District, Farwell, which is in yellow, Connors, which is in orange. And across the other side up here to the top right of the image, or sorry, middle right of the picture, you have another area that goes to Montello, crossing, depending on which road you take, 2 other zones and quite a distance across, districts and quite a distance across to get to Montello Street. Farwell, as I've referenced, Farwell has a more tighter geographic area. It seems to not have a spillover into some other parts of the area. I just wanted to show you, as you look at this, this is where you can see that better image of, this is that blue strip that goes to Montello.
Can you tell us what streets are, like a couple of the streets that are in that list there?
Yeah, I can. So this road here, this long road right down the middle of Farwell is Webster. And that comes down onto East Ave this way. Again, this longer one that is.
What about, I'm talking about the right-hand top corner that's chucked up right there.
Right here?
What area is that that's?
Yeah, so this is just off of Pleasant. So this is Scribner right here that goes across.
Okay.
And this is Pleasant, and it goes down to Alfred Floyd Parkway is this one down there. So it's that lower quadrant. I would say not too far from the Ramada.
Yeah.
That kind of go uphill from there. Pleasant. And then you have the Connors district, which some of it spills onto the other screen, but I tried to zoom in so you could get a good picture of it. Here, of course, you have Canal and River Road and things like that come on across. This here is 95, to give you a frame of reference that goes up through. And this this more of a cutoff road here is Lisbon. You can see the off and the exit. So that's the Connors district. McMahon, which is again split by this is Savannah Street here, and then you have these. This is Grove that kind of splits off here towards Pond Road, crosses Pond Road. Excuse me, and it gives you an idea of the demographic there. I should say demographic. Gives you an idea of the geographic spacing. So when we looked at that, we wanted to think, okay, so what are the demographic breakdowns of each of these schools? I want to thank Joel Spence in our tech department. Spence is all things student information systems and was very helpful in pulling some of these reports, but also color coding them so we could use them for reference. And reading these across, the first one is Connors Elementary School. When you see a red, it's representative that it's higher than its counterparts in that particular zone. So things that really stood out to me are English language learners, are economically disadvantaged, and obviously some others that you can see in there. But when you look at it, any school that has a higher population of English language learners and economically disadvantaged has a higher population of students that correlates with a need for more resources and an increased instruction. I wouldn't say these things are necessarily directly cause and effect, but it does correlate. So as you read down, you can see Farwell Elementary School. When you read across, you can see that they're 12.9% English language learner as compared to Connors, or down here Montello, at 39 and 41% respectively. Economically disadvantaged, Montello lands here at 76.1% and Connors at 78%. And so when we start painting a picture with these colors, at least in my mind, what I'm seeing is a much stronger density of students who are language learners and economically disadvantaged within the population of the school. That's one component. We're also looking at our schools that are just as full as could be in many places. So when we try to think about, well, how do we strike this balance when we think budget and resources and the students that we're serving, it really causes us to think about some things.
What's Team Purple?
Team Purple is a team at the high school. They work with bridging some things for students who struggle in 8th grade, and also some students who seem to excel with the hands-on model a little more. In this particular one, you can see breakdown by percents, which can be helpful, but it's just the elementary school, so it's not as big as that last graphic. And again, you can see those colors that stand out. Now, our district at this point, the data fluctuates day to day, but you can see that Black or African American, the percentages in each of these schools, if we did the math out, we're between 40 and 50% roughly Black or African American students. But our demographics at each school vary, very greatly. So this is the out-of-district school or superintendent agreement form. And there's a few things to note as you look through it. These get filled out by a parent upon request. They submit them to my office and we review them. And there's things that we consider. So we reach out to the principal. One, do you have space? Two, do you have the ability to meet the resource need that the student may need? So for example, sometimes we get requests for out-of-district placements within our district for a student that has a significant need, like they're in the FLS program. And we need to explain to the parent that that program exists at Farwell currently, That's why your student is placed there. And so just because you move, we would still find a way to transport your student to that place where we provide specialized services. There's a daycare information on here. And then there's the bottom part of the form. It says the parent or the guardian is responsible for transportation unless daycare is in the school district and there's room on the bus. What we found this fall when we started looking at, again, getting kids to school with our hybrid model during the pandemic is that these students are all over the place. And I understand why, but a number of them were asking where their bus was. So when you apply for that, like I said, in first grade, but you stay at the school successive years, many students have found their way onto a bus that goes to that school or will get them there. And many accommodations have been made. I can appreciate that, but when we look at not being able to provide condos enough buses on time because they dismissed last term, that's a problem. We have agreements in place where people have said we'll transport our kids, and then they don't, and then those buses run late, and we have conversations at this level with you all being put in a tough position at times to say we have an inequitable experience for our Connors Elementary School kids who need a ride, who have to wait later, double bus runs. Can we provide a bus? Could they walk? We monitor the walk. We supervise the walk. All of these things. And when you really dig into it from a research perspective, you find that part of that reason is all these spiderweb bus routes to accommodate the students who have out-of-district placements within our district. The child must be brought to school to and from in a timely fashion, and parents transporting. If unexcused absenteeism or tardiness should become an issue, the child will be moved to your in-district school. We can provide transportation. I appreciate the talking point, but there are tons of unique family situations in which I find that to be a challenge when I put on my glasses and try to look at that from an equity lens. Attending an out-of-district school is a privilege, and students are expected to meet school expectations for behavior and academic work. And then, for pre-K students, if your request is being granted for this year, it does not carry on to the next school year. Permission must be granted for the following year, as classroom enrollments often change from year to year. Caveat to that is what it doesn't say. For that first, second, third, fourth grader that got permission to go to the out-of-district school, it just rolls for the next year. Parents don't apply again. Again, there's no policy to govern how that process works. I also want to note that this isn't a small number. This is in the hundreds of students that are going to schools that are not within their district. And so when I realized the volume, and I realized that there was no parameters, and we were having discussions about whether or not we could bus our kids to school in a hybrid plan, it made me go look at the map. And when I looked at the map, I was trying to make sense of the history of the demographics and how things got to be the way they are. And it was hard to track. Graduation data by elementary school. This actually just worked out because Spence, again, Joel Spence, our student information systems gentleman, he had been looking at this from a high school perspective. So when he knew I was having this conversation, he shared the data set with me. What this is students who graduated last year in the class of 2020. So these are the students that graduated within a 4-year cohort. So anyone who didn't graduate last year or they graduated on a 5-year plan, they're not part of this. But you can see here what school those students went to when they were in 6th grade. And then what percent of those students who were at that school in 6th grade graduated. So when we talk about school demographics, I don't want to just say we should do this and this and this. I really think it takes some research and some digging deep at the data to see, one, how is that impacting us, our kids potentially locally? So I asked Spence about this data, and we had a conversation, and I didn't have a graphic to bring with me, but he can dig deeper than this. For example, where was the student in 5th grade, in 4th grade? When did they enroll in our district? Was it during their schooling? Was it at the start of their schooling? How many times have they enrolled in our district? You get some kids who have lived here, moved, lived here, moved, lived here, moved. The numbers on students who have enrolled here multiple times and how they play out from a 4-year cohort of graduation is staggering. By staggering, I mean extremely low. Students who move multiple times for their enrollments throughout their career, and this is understandable if you give it some thought, that they struggle to be successful in school. There's lots of reasons that could be. One of them could be just how often they move around. The reason I bring that up is, one, I think it's interesting, I hadn't thought of it from that side of the data, but also being real mindful that if some kind of decision is made to shift the way in which we district or to change the way we write policy to transition, the data tells us right here in this, that if we change a student's enrollment, it will negatively impact their ability to graduate. And so there's a delicate conversation. So from a workshop perspective, just some steps we could take to develop and implement a process for analysis of enrollment data, which has started, but I think I'd like to dig deeper. Taking a look at the finances and the educational resources to come up with great recommendations. We came up with a really perfect plan, but it might cost transportation millions of dollars more, and that might dominate the conversation. I don't know that answer. We haven't had a chance to map that out. Develop district policy to govern out-of-district placements and teacher requests. I added teacher requests in here because in some of the work we've done here, we had a small team come together in short notice there last week to look at this as availability allowed. And one of the things that was shared was it's not just someone requesting their kids go to another school. There's also a layer of parents wanting their kids to have specific teachers. And so when we look at this from an institutional perspective, that's a significant challenge for me. And I want to tell you why, because to me, when we talk about things like institutional racism, which so many people are in a different place in their conversation about, that's an example. That's a specific example. I will navigate the system, get my child to go to a specific school, and then I will navigate that school to get my child to have the best teachers in that school, because I will talk to my social network and I'll find out those pieces. And I will get my child a better education than anybody else. And I appreciate the passion of parents, but there will be those left behind. And this process, without any policy to guide it, I think is missing some components that we need to be thoughtful. I think this needs to be a tiered approach over multiple years, really looking at overcrowding and the balance of these numbers. And by overcrowding, it can be specialized area, it can be a broad matrix. But what I don't want to do with a student is pull them from a place where they're learning, they're familiar, they have relationships, they have school pride, they have continuity, and create a data set at that 4-year cohort for graduation, because we disrupted their education without thinking about how we tier this out and phase something in. And then I want to say this out loud for everyone to hear, and there's a lot of chatter in our community, and I think it's good, because I think some level of discomfort means we're learning and we're growing and on that journey towards equity. But we need to focus on multicultural education and make a commitment like this board already did through the poverty work, that we are going to work toward excellence through equity. And I want to continue to frame the equity plan for those public schools, as I mentioned in different meetings, with all the different things that we're doing, from affinity groups to the equity audit, and continue to have a LPS equity plan with a roll-up day of July 1, so that people know exactly what it is we're looking to do and how. So to that, I open it up for discussion, and I can go back to any slides and ask questions over, and I'll grab some notes as we go.
Alicia has one, just right as her hand raised.
Should I stop the share or leave it?
If you could stop it, that'd be great.
Yes.
Thanks. I like to talk to people, not a screen. So can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for pulling this together, Superintendent Langlis. I think the impetus for this conversation, it remains critical as we think about equity moving forward. And I had asked for that elementary to high school graduation rate figure because I had some suspicions that were confirmed. And I think it's really fascinating to hear you speak about agreements for families who want students to have specific teachers, or folks whose best friends go to out of district placement, and just the immense privilege that comes with being able to negotiate that with the superintendent really strikes me. And as we have this conversation, I definitely want to talk about it forward looking. I wouldn't want to interrupt anyone's schooling. You know, folks all come together for the middle school and high school experience, and that's soon enough. But I think looking forward, having, I guess, is contiguous only used for the United States? I mean, I feel like we should have contiguous districts, even if they don't make the most sense for transportation. I think, you know, if I had children, they'd go to Geiger. But if I lived 2 streets over, they would go to Montello. And, you know, we think about that all the time with how our wards are set up, given that folks are elected to wards, and I can't keep track of everyone in Ward 3, which school they go to, that sort of thing. So, so those are just a few impressions. I think the other thing to think about is the state law on school choice and options. And we are far more accommodating. And I think some of that has to do with equity, but I think we could really rein it in and make it more fair to everyone.
So I wanted to bring forward a proposal, just to throw out some ideas and some talking points. So I don't know if you want me to do that now or let everybody talk.
Is it just for discussion, or is it something you're expecting action on?
Not tonight, no. It's for discussion to, if there's something that gels with everybody, to maybe put it on for next week or the week after, or be able to give the public the opportunity to weigh in. So when I took a look at everything, there was things that jumped out at me, you know, as you can see there. And the one that's most disturbing is if we don't make a change, we're on the road to, you know, having a segregated school department. And there's significant federal laws that came down to address that. With that in mind, as I go around to the schools, I can't help but think that with this, with the demographics being uneven, that there's a lot of lost opportunities, you know, equity-wise for all students, that it's kind of unbalanced. And one thing you do notice in the school, in our elementary schools, is every school, as Jake started to allude to it, offers something different. It's not, you can't go from McMahon to Farwell to Geiger and have the same thing. As always, they're focused on different areas. And my thought is that if we have a more equitable demographic, that it allows administration to plan on expanding these opportunities at all schools. In my mind, all 5 elementaries should have equal availability. You know, that they shouldn't be, you know, if a student's going to McMahon and all of a sudden they're told, well, next year you're going to have to go to Geiger because we don't have this program here. I mean, it just, you know, takes someone up. The other part I looked at was I wasn't interested in changing any existing enrollment. But with a child going to school, the child should stay. And I'm not using the R word, the redistricting word. I feel that there's an ability through administration to do this in a productive way without getting to that. However, as I'll see in my 5 points, I leave that as a last resort. So my first point is that all schools should reflect the demographics of the Lewiston School Department across the board. And my proposal would require that by 2024, 3 years' time, that we would hope to have the demographics within 5% of what our school as a district is, according to those numbers. And one piece of numbers you could use is the high school and the middle school. You know, they're already integrated. So if we can get within 5%, and hats off to McMahon, because McMahon seems to have pretty decent numbers in that way, that we begin to, the thing that is so telling in that map is to see that we have inner city kids down in the downtown area being siphoned off all the way out to Montello, past schools that they could be more readily available. Even that little sliver on Main Street going up to Geiger, but yet they're thrown over Montello. And then we have the Pleasant Street neighborhood that instead of having access to their local community school, they have to go all the way to Montello. And these things gotta work their way out. If we focus towards working towards an equal number or within a reasonable range of the number, you know, that we can start to do that. And one way I'm looking at that is basically looking at establishing policy for administration to give them guidance and rules for two things. One, to restrict out of district placements and leave that to the most extraordinary of circumstances. And that by not addressing kids that are already in the school, that we do twofold. One, we start from the very beginning, from preschool and kindergarten. And what we do is we take a look and we restrict who's going where, unless they absolutely have to. And secondly, we offer the minority community the opportunity to go to schools that are more closer to where they're at than going all over. And I don't mean to pick on Montello, but it's very telling that we have a 60% minority school in a neighborhood that is lucky if you're 5 or 10%. And that just strikes me. And I think that they should be, minorities should have the opportunity to experience the newer schools, opportunities in Geiger and the programming that's there. Same thing with Farwell. If McMahon enters the discussion, I don't think it will, but if that discussion, they should have the opportunity there. Connors is an enigma because it's a massive school and it sits right next door to the inner city neighborhood. So the fact that we have extraordinary numbers in Connors is not a surprise. That's predictable. But even then, there's some, I'm wondering about the map of some of those districts. So I wanted to throw this out to the committee to see if that could be a starting point, to establish that we would want to get our demographics within 3 years, instructing administration, you know, to use the tools that are available in restricting the amount of movement and enabling and giving minorities choices, their choice. Again, I want to use the word choice a lot here. I don't want to say I'm forcing something on people. If they're not comfortable with wanting to go there are families that want to go there. And instead they're going up to Montello. So, and then the last piece is if by 2024, we can't get within 5% of a integrated school system, that we have a mechanism in place that will start a redistricting plan so that we can get away from the gerrymandering and begin to bring kids into their neighborhood school more equitably than what we're doing now. So that's just my initial throw out to everybody and see, you know, if that's something, if there's anything there that we can work with.
Can I ask you a clarifying question on that? So maybe I missed something, but if we're trying to get students to go to the schools that are closest to them, but we're also trying to get a 5% span on the demographics, if everybody in Lewiston goes to the school that's closest to them, our schools are not going to be diverse because the layout of the city isn't diverse. So I'm confused on how that's going to work.
Well, I think in terms of when you take a look at the map, you know, with the gerrymandering, it's 4-pronged. that we begin to eliminate one prong by allowing those kids to go to Geiger. We eliminate another prong by allowing them to go to McMahon. We eliminate another prong by allowing them to go to Farwell. So there's room there, and I mean, it's not gonna be perfect, certainly. And again, it depends on how we can do this, starting at the very beginning, and allowing populations to go to certain, giving them the opportunity to go to schools of their choice. And not just randomly allowing anybody to put in one of those forms to take the kids out. I think that when you take a look at the gerrymandering of Montello, if Montello was a straight district and 60% of the minorities were living up there off of Montello Street, then I would say, yeah, that's a kind of a push. The fact that we are shuttling our minority students better than halfway across the city to go to a particular school, past other schools that they could be accessing, tells me there's room to be able to start to move those numbers.
That's where I get confused, sorry, and maybe I'm missing something. If we eliminate that, and then Montello, for example, is just for the neighborhoods surrounding Montello, then Montello will have very limited diversity. It won't be closer to 5%, it'll be even further from 5% because of the makeup around Montello. And then if we take the students that were being bused to Montello and return them to their closest school, which would be Connors or Farwell, then Connors and Farwell will be in the other direction with the minority students. So that's where I'm getting lost and I'm not following what you're saying.
Well, moving on, if we bring that 60% number down to the 40%, now let's say we start going to 30%. Well, now Montello will hit that rule of being within 5%. And then, that would then become an available school for a minority population to access. Because, obviously that it's different from a neighborhood school.
So we would remove the minority population that's there currently and then give them the option to choose to go back if they want to?
Sure, it's all about option. It's right now, I don't think they're getting the option. I think if you take a look at that map, kids on Ash Street are going to Montello Street. Kids right here on Birch Street are going to Montello Street. It's odd. And I think if we give the flexibility to administration to kind of see where they're going with the numbers, they got a target date. They can go, they know where they can go. And then in any given year, you're going to have some fluctuation of student availability of spots that naturally he might be able to make some changes to without shifting anything. And again, this may be imperfect. This is why in 3 years, maybe we're 8%, within 8% of the and we have to take a look at redistricting. So I just think that the way that Montello district is gerrymandered and coming from the other districts, I can't wrap my head around understanding how we got Montello to be a 60% minority school. It just blows my mind. And I think we're not changing it. So right now we're on that road to even going higher than that. So, I think there's opportunity to bring it down, to get it within a range. That's why I specify a range, not trying to get a particular target. Understanding there's going to be a lot of flexibilities of where parents can go and so forth. And one thing I want to do if I get this on the agenda for a vote is to give the community and the schools and the teachers the opportunity to weigh in. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing. Maybe they need to. I do know that there have been a few families saying, I'm fine going to Montello. Great, go ahead and go to Montello. I also have families that want to go to Farwell and Geiger. So, I think it's enabling those that want to be enabled and respecting those that want to be kept where they're at. So I think there's a lot of opportunity within the administrative guidelines that we can work with it without forcing something now. I think we can change these numbers just with its policy changes and a goal.
Okay, go ahead.
There are members that are currently as attendees that were part of this conversation group, and I didn't know if any of you wanted to share anything. Mr. Williams, Cliff, James Ford, Hillary, Aisha, was there anyone that wanted to add anything to the conversation?
You should say this.
Go ahead, Aisha.
Good evening, everybody. Oh, well, look, okay, that's fine. I just felt obligated to say something, considering I was a part of that conversation, and I wanted to just emphasize having that community conversation is important, because we don't have a picture of what parents and families are thinking and saying, and I feel like I'm assuming why you're choosing to go to one school or the other, and what that means if we keep talking about gerrymandering. What does that mean to them, and if they have any idea of what a conversation like this will look like, and you know what we're thinking. So that's the only thing that I would add. I also add or emphasize that multicultural education, and add on to there as well that we should be emphasizing a social justice education, which pushes that critical consciousness. So all our students are thinking about the things we're talking about right now as they're happening to them and for them, so that there isn't so many meetings of grownups talking about what's happening with them. So that's all I'll add.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Is that?
Alicia does. I didn't
Oh.
know if anyone of the other. Okay, go ahead, Alicia.
Was that me?
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So I think, reflecting on Member Popvin's remarks, I think there's two issues at play here. And it might be helpful to talk about them separately. So I think the current form that exists, Superintendent Linglis, is that in policy anywhere, or is that just like a random form that isn't associated with any policy?
I think it evolved to a level of past practice. There's no policy that I'm aware of for the out-of-district placements within the district. There is language at the state level that talks about out-of-district placements and working with families, and there's an appeals process to go to the state if you haven't considered.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the state law, but it's not ringing any bells in Lewiston policy manual that I can think of, but it's a lot of pages. So I think tightening up that policy and kind of enshrining that form as a part of policy would be a really important step forward here, because again, as you alluded to, Superintendent, and as I've heard about some of these superintendent's agreements, a lot of them are rooted in privilege and network, and in a space that really isn't in the best interest of the families and students, in my opinion. And then the secondary conversation is about this proposal, this plan to look to have more equitable demographics with the 5% range, such as Member Potvin is suggesting. And I don't have as many feelings about that currently, based on the fact that it fluctuates so much. But I think refining that out of district policy could be a good first step.
Thank you. Mr. Ramirez-Collins.
So, if Member Potvin's proposal was put forward for a vote, I would vote for it. I think it's an important step in the right direction for the district. I'm not as convinced as he is that we can do this without any kind of redistricting. And I think what's really important to understand about these conversations is that in a lot of cases, school districts have to balance between the desire to have neighborhood schools and the desire to have schools that are demographically reflective of their communities. Lewiston's map is so messed up that we don't have to choose. We can move our district towards more neighborhood schools and more representative of the city as a whole. And at a certain point, then we would have to start to choose. But for a good amount of changing the map, we wouldn't have to choose. We'd be making kids go to schools that are closer to where they are, and bringing the schools into demographic balance. You know, I think it's nuts that kids who live in my building on Lisbon Street are going to Montello, as Member Potvin said. I think it's nuts that Ward 3, which Member Ray and I both represent, which constitutes 1/7 of the city's population, has students going to 4 of the 5 different elementary schools. I think that we can do so much better than this. And I guess I would also want to ask the superintendent about the issue of teacher requests, because I wasn't aware of that before tonight, and it blew my mind that we would let families dictate what teacher their kid is going to have. Is there any reason that we should not outright ban that practice, you know, next week?
You're referring to parents requesting that their teachers have their schedules changed to have specific other teachers instead of what their schedule was given. That's what I was just wondering if you're talking about.
Yeah, where parents are asking that their kid have a certain teacher instead of you know, teacher A instead of teacher B.
Yeah, that does, there are pressures out there for that. So,
And do you think that there's any merit to keeping that other than just making pushy parents happy?
I think the administration works hard to balance their enrollments and their teacher skill sets to the needs. So I think when that schedule is built, it should be maintained.
Okay, so you know, along with what Member Potvin has suggested, I would also suggest that the school committee should think about a prohibition on formal teacher requests. I mean, it's one thing for somebody to say, you know, oh, my eldest kid had this teacher and they had a really good relationship, so if it works out and my younger kid did that, that's great. I think that any sort of formal request process or any meaningful pressure being placed on administrators at the building level to make sure that a certain kid has a certain teacher is crazy. And I think that Member Ray makes a good point that is coming from a place of incredible privilege. I also think that it's interesting when we look at this slideshow that there seems to be an inverse relationship between the percentage of students in an elementary school who are identified as ELL and the percentage of students in an elementary school who are identified as special ed. And you know, this is not directly salient to the conversation, but I think it's worth remembering that that's probably a result of our chronic under identification of ELL students as special. That's, I guess, what I've got. I think that we ought to really consider moving towards having contiguous and compact school districts that are, you know, informed by our demographics and informed by allowing students to go to school with their immediate neighbors, to walk to school when they can. I think that one of the crazier parts of this map is that if you live at Connors Elementary School, you would go to Farwell. And I think that it's not too much to ask that elementary schools be located in the district that students are going to them from. But I certainly think that Member Potvin's proposal is a good first step.
I think I recall that currently any student can choose to go to a different school, correct? Because of the testing scores are low, so that it's not like that anymore. It was like that.
It was a few years ago.
Oh, okay.
There was some language around the NYP when it shifted to which there was some shifts in that. There are, as it stands right now, any parent or guardian can request an out-of-district placement for any student.
So for me, a big thing that stood out is when we got to that graduation rates, 6th grade and on, when you see Geiger being 90%, so far ahead of the others, my question is, what are they doing at Geiger and how can we replicate that everywhere else? Because obviously something is working. But also, from living in the downtown and knowing that not everybody has the cab fare to get to Montello if their kid is sick. I don't even know if the bus still goes to Montello or not. It did for a while. But I know that the majority of our public schools are not on the bus system. So if you are a parent in the downtown, if your kid is going to Farwell or one of the other schools, that's an Uber, that's a cab fare, that's hunting down someone you know who's not working. Good luck with that one, to get your kid. And that's when we have kids that go to school sick. That's why we have kids that, end up sitting in the nurse's office for hours before the parents can come and get them, when they shouldn't be. And this could be, I think the changes could be good if we can get them into schools that are closer to where they live. But I think it's also on us to put some pressure on city government and our transportation department or the public buses to be like, hey, just because it's not on the run now doesn't mean it shouldn't be. I'm glad to see that, I didn't see any of the housing developments I know of being specifically sectioned into specific places. That was good to see, because I've seen that happen other places. But the idea that we have kids that are way out, Webster out, not Webster, Pleasant Street, going to a school that is halfway across town. It's just kind of like, okay, that makes sense, I guess, not. And I don't know how it came about, and I'm not demonizing anybody, but that doesn't speak to making schools easily accessible. It speaks to, what can we do? And I don't like it when people say, what can we do? Because it means something that maybe shouldn't be happening is. I know there are some families that I know in the downtown that are happy with their kids going to Montello because all the kids from the neighborhood go to Montello and they feel safe there. That's a sad thing. The kids choose to go to a school that far away from their home because they feel safe together, or the family feels safe with them together. That tells me that this work towards equity is more important than we're giving it credit for. We know racism is a taught belief system. And a lot of that teaching comes from lack of exposure. When my 13-year-old comes down from Newport and we go to the park, he doesn't know how to interact with immigrant children because there are none where he's from. So I know if he does end up living with me, there's going to be a sharp learning curve for him to learn how to interact with kids he's never had to interact with before. If things were more equitable, it wouldn't even be something they have to learn. It would just be something that is, the way it should be.
Having lived through Lewiston Public Schools my entire childhood, I can say that a lot of it came about, so you're not sure how it came about. A lot of it came about in the 80s when Wallace School was closed and Fry School was closed. When those small community schools were shut down, that chunk of students like around Ash Street area and down to Knox and Elizabeth Street, that whole area, they were sent to Montello because that was where there was availability. And then when Wallace on Main Street shut down, those students were shipped somewhere because of availability, and that's when Pettingill was there. And so I think a lot of those small community schools that were shut down in the 80s, and I think probably with good intention, I don't know, has led to this problem now where we have these big, huge schools spread out all over town and then people being shipped in different places. So I hope it was well-intentioned in the 80s, but this is what we have now.
Might be time to start shifting back.
Miss Aisha has her hand raised again.
Hey again, I just would feel a way if I didn't bring the attention to our teacher recruitment and retention for students of color to see people who look like them in those classes wherever they go in our district. That's really important to the conversation when we're talking about desegregating or integrating. The piece that's missing is that kids don't get an opportunity to learn from folks of color. And as we talk about this, and it won't matter where we're moving students, if they're having that same experience where they're not exposed to teachers and educators who come from different backgrounds. Thank you.
Ms. Ryan.
Thank you. I should have started with this question, but Superintendent Langlis, can you remind us what the definition of economically disadvantaged is for LPS?
Specific cutoffs, I don't know. Karen, do you know the specific?
Yeah, so the simplest terms I can put it in is students who would, and families who would qualify for free and reduced lunch.
And what does that mean about that family?
So they would be below a certain income level. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but
Okay, I think that's important to consider as we look at all of the elementary schools where, you know, the word minority got thrown around a bunch, but majority of our students fall into that bracket. And I think that's something, you know, I've talked a lot about Lewiston in the context of state work. Lewiston's incredibly different from other school administrative units because A, we're municipal, and B, this is what our student population looks like. And so I don't want to lose that thread as we talk about it as well, because that is somehow better distributed than some of our race and ethnicity, and then some of our ELL and special education signifiers are. So just wanted to make sure I understood that well.
Just a couple of historical points. I've been around a long time. I've been active and stuff going on. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, superintendent made a proposal to try to redistrict to do away with a lot of the gerrymandering. One of the criteria we were using was economically disadvantaged, using the free and reduced lunch metric as a way to try to see if there was something we could do to diversify all of things in schools. We spent a significant amount of time working on that. In the end, it came down to a vote of the school committee to just throw it under the bus and just leave it to the superintendent's discretion with these out-of-district placements. And it was very discouraging. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of pushback from the community about trying to redistrict it, to try to equalize it up. Now, that was probably 5 or 6 years ago, and hopefully things have changed somewhat. But I think that there's going to be some pushback, whether we like it or not. I thought that the way we were trying to propose it was going to eliminate most of that gerrymandering and was going to consolidate it so kids were closer to the schools. Now, Connors didn't exist. And in fact, one of the people who was on the school board at the time that nixed doing the redistricting was Bob Connors. I was really shocked at the time that happened. He didn't. I thought that he would have really felt that was important, but either here or there. The other thing, when we were looking at where was Connors going to be built, we didn't know it was Connors at that time. We actually looked at a site that's way out on outer Webster Street, up on the top of the hill up behind where, I don't know if you know where
Beer factories.
if you go out past where White Rock Distilleries is and go up on top of the hill, way up on the outer part of Webster Street. The reason, and there was land out there that looked like a great site, and the reason we didn't do it was just because there was no way to get anybody out there. The bus routes were awful. There was no way for anybody, there's no public transportation, there's nothing. Some of those discussions happened at the time we built this. This is not something that just happened in a vacuum. There was a lot that went into it. We spent 2 years really. We looked at 19 sites to end up with this building here. This wasn't my first choice, but it's here. I'm gonna have to live with the consequences of it. This is a 50-year building, I hope, maybe more. We're gonna be living with where this is as far as the city's concerned. And ultimately it was an intentional decision. So So I think, the history of what's gone on here hasn't just been haphazard, and hasn't just been something that just, oh, well. That oh, well moment is not how we got here. I think we need to be cognizant of that. I mean, can we do something about changing the diversity in the schools? We probably can, but I will tell you that there's probably going to be some heavy lifting to get there, because there is going to be local pushback. Guaranteed. One of the things that in this forum, as Jake pointed out, that I want another district placement for my student. And because I can provide transportation, I can get it. People that are in the downtown that don't have that option, they know that they can't do it. They read the form, they know they're out. But how we manage to move the students that, and COVID has highlighted some of the tremendous challenges of transportation in the city. It's incredible. At one point in time, I don't know if it's still the same today, what Jake or Karen said. I know at one point in time, there were some of the students that were down in the tree streets that were going all the way up to McMahon.
Still happen.
Still happening. So, and for all that it seems like Lewiston's actually a fairly small, compact city by comparison to many. And it seems like it goes way out there. Come on, folks. If you have to walk, it's way out there. Privileged enough to have a vehicle and private transportation, it's not. So those are a lot of things that we have to, there's a balance that we're gonna have to strike here. This is not gonna be simple. And I'm not sure that, trying to set a hard and fast time limit of 3 years on it is gonna be the way that you get there. But certainly it would force us to at least concentrate on it to make it.
Travis Collins, and
I really appreciate that, Mr. Vice Chair Hammond, and I think that's really helpful and pertinent to this conversation. I know that this particular school committee, these 9 folks, have throughout our, 14 months, never shied away from taking on issues of public controversy. And my hope is that we can tackle this one head on. We can, listen, we can think, and we can do what we all feel is right to move the district in a better direction. Obviously, people may end up having different opinions about that, but I think that it sounds like there was a real missed opportunity a few years back, and we shouldn't make that same mistake.
Right now, Mr. Hopkins' proposal to be really a good one. I find Mr. Majerus Collins, Ms. Hawkins' arguments compelling, but certainly it's a little bit more idealistic than achievable. I think the district even has to come in the future if we want to achieve this goal. As far as preference for selecting teachers, I totally agree. I've seen it, I've witnessed it. Honestly, I've not taken it. Both of my sons went to Farwell. I was active in the PTO. Coached the basketball teams, got selected my kids' schools from K to 6. Did not do it as a teacher. I did not show the favoritism. I saw it done. The first time there's an exception, the whole house of cards collapse. So we can be really noble in this, but it's going to take, with human nature, some real guts to say, no, it's not going to happen. I hope that can happen. Thank you.
So I have a couple comments. One is about parents choosing teachers. And I know this from going through it myself when I was in 6th grade. I was assigned a teacher that my mother, for some reason, did not like and thought this other one would be a much better fit. I almost didn't get out of 6th grade. I almost had to go twice because he despised me and made it very clear, and my mother didn't care. I was lucky there were other people watching going, that's not okay, and that's not okay, and this needs to change. I was very lucky. Not to say that that would happen here, but the idea is there. I understand long bus rides. When I was in high school in Alaska, I was on the bus at 6 o'clock in the morning and didn't get to school until 7:45. I did a lot of sleeping on that bus, but that was okay because I got to school I wasn't standing out in the cold for hours on end. But, and then when I drove up north in a rural district, I had a 41-mile round trip every morning and every night. But again, very rural place. We are not so rural. The resources are here if we can make them work the way we need them to. And that's where, like Kieran said, we've got 9 people here who've been willing to make some hard decisions. We've gotten plenty of flack for some of the decisions we've made. But we have reasons for those decisions and we stuck with them. And Mr. Popman's proposal isn't, we need to do X, Y, X, Q, P, Q, and R to get there. It's this is the goal. And it leaves it open to us and the community and the school district on how to get there. That's why I kind of like it, because yeah, it says we want to get to near here, but it doesn't say how. It lets us build that road. And it looks like people have attempted to build that road before, so that might be some good work to take a look at and maybe carry forward. But I don't think any of us here are going to say we're not going to try something just because it might be a little hard. Yeah, we're probably going to have some convincing to do. I know I have plenty of convincing to do downtown all the time. No, just because that 5-year-old wants to play in your yard doesn't mean you get to throw rocks at him. That was my backyard, not last summer, but the summer before. No, he's not your neighbor, but he can play in the yard, it's okay. That's what we're here for, is to help guide this to a better school district than it was when we got here. And we've made some good progress. We've done some really amazing things getting through this pandemic. I don't see why we need to stop or say that's too hard. We've done hard. Shutting down the school district, learning how to do hybrid. That's hard, and we're doing it. It may not be perfect, and we know it's not perfect, but it's something.
We just wrap up my section of it in addressing Member Damon's concerns, and that's definitely, it was in my mind on presenting this and how the community reacts. And certainly Boston didn't react very well back in the 70s, living it and every day. But we have an opportunity to not go down that road. And what I specifically tried to reflect is not forcing people to do something, giving them choice, keeping kids in the existing schools, and moving towards something with a future goal. It's hard for me to imagine any parent walking through that door to say, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with the fact you're giving me a choice whether I can keep my kid in school. I have a problem with the fact that you want to be equitable across the board. I think that what we have is an opportunity to create a platform that we can give to administration to better the system, so we don't go through what you went through 5-6 years ago. And I'll just close with this, and I'll say it. The whole reason I'm pushing this and I brought it forward is because of the 12 to 15 families that wanted their kids out of Montello because they didn't want their kids associating with a certain demographic. I was very disheartened as a school committee member to be asked to help them with that. And there wasn't any educational reason behind it. And then even more disheartened to know that there are several teachers that were not interested in teaching in certain demographic schools. And then we asked our question here in Connors when we opened this. One of the biggest things that kept coming to the forefront is the level of inexperience starting this school with a tenure of the amount of education that how many years they had, the teachers that were teaching there, and that there was a notable absence of seniority here. And I wonder why. You know, and when I see these things coming together, and if we don't act and we don't put something in place, I see us going down a very bad road. And administration needs teeth, it needs support, it needs guidance. The schools need support and guidance, and the community needs support and guidance. And I really think that this is a foundational effort to build into the equity piece of which the city is trying to attain as a whole. You know, that we address that we're a very diverse community, and we start with the schools here, and then city can take it from there and build upon it.
So for someone whose kids have gone to at least 3 of the elementary schools, Montello, Geiger, I've experienced with all of them. And I would say the overcrowdedness of Montello is just like unbelievable. So you probably 3 or 4 years ago now, I don't know what year it was, it seemed like from talking with staff, when my kids went there, it seemed like there was 5 kids coming in every single day. But the numbers just kept growing and growing and growing. And so I would ask, well, why don't we send them to another school? And I would get the teacher say the shrug thing. And it seems like if our school is just that school's could be overcrowded, why wouldn't we spread them out to the other schools? Now going over to the other schools, you know, we're trying to figure out hybrid stuff and within some schools. Differences problem. You looked at their last school year, you looked at some of their classroom size, the highest number was like 21, 20, around those numbers. You go to Montello, 7, 28, 29. So what I always ask is why is Montello allowed to just be overcrowded where a school like Farwell can't take some of that slack up, or Geiger or McMahon or whatever it is. But I just know from just Montello's always so overcrowded. And so I have to ask the question why. So people say, came up with a teacher preference, and why is that? And some of it on the flip side I would ask is, there's some teachers who are better just working with minorities. And it just came up with conversation a little bit where you're saying, hey, some teachers do not want to work in certain schools because they know possibility that they don't want to work with that. And the sad thing, it is a reality. It's just the way it is. And on the flip side is if a kid, wants a teacher on the flip side that wants a teacher that works better with minorities, works better with providing equity, that presents almost of a bigger problem within the district that's I know it's being addressed, but again, that's the bigger problem. There was an example again that someone told me about the high school where a kid has not gone to school all year long, and a minority kid was having a teacher at the high school, and things just were not working well. And so they were trying to keep that teacher with the minority kid, where this other kid, again, hasn't gone to school all year long, he's just coming in, his dad is there advocating for him, he's getting everything he needs, and here this minority kid is trying to kind of, things aren't hitting off well, so he's trying to get a change, and his parents not there advocating for them, which happens quite a bit with a certain demographic. And here they're trying to keep this teacher with this kid, and finally a teacher, I'm glad, who's a great advocate for kids, said, hey, no, this is not right. This is, this sounds like this needs to be a change made, and for the best of this kid. So I like to bring that part up. Part of the problem too is, again, and I think you brought it up, and it happens quite a bit, is, call it what you want, racist, classist. There's a big classist caste system in Lewiston. When I first moved to Lewiston, when before Geiger was built, it was a Pettingill. You would meet somebody in sports, oh, my kid goes to Pettingill, my kid's a Pettingill girl. I'm like, wow, that exists only on an elementary school, you would have thought this kid was going to Harvard or something. You know, and just the fact that is if you go around to certain, you know, some of the PTOs and some of the things that are done there, and granted, Montello doesn't have a lot of parent involvement. And you have a school like, you know, Geiger has a big PTO and you get things like that, and it's almost like there is a big discrepancy of what's going on. And what's the right answer to fix it? I think it's just small, making small changes at a time. And I think this committee is a committee that, like you said, does not mind certain controversy nonetheless. But I think we just have to, before we start saying, cutting everything and saying, hey, this is the bottom line, I think we have to at least give some discretion a little bit. And again, you know, it's a tough road to navigate. And you said, hey, as soon as you let out the cards, fall down. It's just not a cookie cutter answer for everything. But I think we really take a look at why things are taking place, and two is have a little bit of discretion. And that's where administration has to have a hard line to say, hey, listen, this doesn't seem like this is in the best interest of what's good. This seems like it's the best interest of you just trying to push your kid ahead. So that's all I got.
And this is where, you know, when Elgin talks about teachers that maybe work better with the demographic than others do, set up a mentorship program. Because I know some of those skills are things that can be learned. Watch how somebody else does it, understand why they do it, and emulate it. Because these kids, they want connection. They want their teacher to be someone they can like and get along with and learn from. They don't care what color their skin is until it comes to a point where they don't see anybody that looks like them. Which is where Aisha's comment about getting a change in the teachers that are coming in. But it's not that hard to work with kids. They're all kids. Yeah, maybe they look a little different. Maybe their culture is a little bit different. But that doesn't mean that you can't interact with them. I have great interaction with kids in my neighborhood, but that's because I have work guns. But you know, there's ways to work around difficulties if you're willing to do the work. And I think we need to make that work as easy as possible for our teachers. Because they want to teach, the kids want to learn. Let's build those bridges and make it happen.
I just want to piggyback on what she said. I think and it becomes a hard line where, again, we have demographics where their life's home isn't easy. And I find out in our school system, we have we have one side that goes, they're too easy on, where they allow everything to get away because they're trying to be understanding. Then you have a certain demographic of teachers that are so like, it's just hard on them, they can't understand where they're coming from. You know, I've heard stories of teachers being mad, right? Kids starting in 4th grade, right? Kids going up doing the floss, handing in the schoolwork, and the teacher's going ballistic. Well, the teacher's going ballistic because a kid's wearing hat in the building. And listen, I'm fortunate. I grew up in a middle class house. Okay, you know what? We didn't wear hats in the buildings, but geez, and pro, we're going to start a war or a battle over wearing a hat or having a hoodie on, and because maybe a kid just had a bad day or had a blow up at a bus stop or had a blow up at the bus, and the kid is, not just thing what kids do, they want to cover their face when there's something going on, there's some sort of trauma. And then you got some teacher going around starting World War V over wearing a hoodie in the building. And I didn't even ask what the kid's going on. And so again, trying to find that fine line of what's being understanding and what's being too easy. It's definitely a fine line, and it's come up early in conversations earlier last year in 2020 in terms of this like restorative justice is how do we balance trying to be understanding and also to give the kids some discipline because frankly some of the kids they do need discipline because the discipline's not happening at home. But how do you do that without doing such things? And I think it's a tough, tough thing to battle. And I know there's some work being done around restorative justice and trying to do those things. So, again, challenges are ahead of us of giving, the tools of, for teachers to provide some of that professional development. But I think it all just starts with just wanting to be there and make a difference and being understanding. It's every profession. It's every profession. Like in law enforcement, you see some people and they just like, they've been doing it for years. They really don't have the patience for it. And you see some people who come along that's kind of like, they have too much patience. They're trying to find that fine line. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I for one have a deep and abiding respect for what teachers do. I think it's really hard. And I give incredible credit to the folks who get up every day and try their best and try to help our kids. And I think that 95–98% of our teachers are in that category, whether they're learning or they're already great. All of that is great with me. But when it comes to folks like Member Potts that talked about, if you're somebody who only wants to teach white kids, I don't think you should be teaching. You certainly shouldn't be teaching this. So, I think that our district should be aiming to get away from, a concern where you've got a kid's needing to get out of the class because a teacher isn't gonna be there for them. There's teachers who are learning and there's teachers who are great, but teachers who aren't trying, or teachers who actively don't want to teach students of color, we just shouldn't have any patience in that.
So I just want to add one last thing, and I don't know if necessarily it's and I'm going to give teachers the benefit of that. I don't know necessarily it's a thing to teach them color. It's the background that comes along with the kid from growing up in an economically challenged or around the neighborhood they grow in. I think that's a big component. I don't know if necessarily it's a color thing. It's everything that comes along with the kid that's growing up challenged. And it takes, there's some great teachers out there that are so compassionate. They give kids hugs every day. I mean, sometimes the teachers they have another new teacher the next year later. They're still coming by and seeing that teacher and see their interactions in the hallway, and all those kind of things. But again, I just really think it's one of those things, and I know our district is doing those things, and I know they're going to keep continuing. But again, it's trying to work with teachers to work better with a demographic that's having these challenges economically. And again, I don't think it's necessarily the color thing.
Any other discussion, members of the public that would like to speak?
So for next steps, I gathered a lot of notes and got some feedback. It sounds like there's support, I think, around at least exploring policy around the district placements. I don't know if that's a good next step, so take a look at that. If there are other items that maybe we'd like to have before the public as a regular agenda item coming up.
Mr. Driscoll.
I guess I'd like to see Member Potts's proposal on an upcoming agenda for opportunity for public discussion and consideration, deliberation, amendment, and ultimately vote.
Let's please sit with Jake and fine tune it, from what we heard tonight. Come up with something to be able to put on the agenda to talk about, get the public involved in the discussion. And maybe it sounds, there's enough that sounds right, move on and at least begin the greater discussion by this move forward.
I think making sure that we make a very intentional effort to communicate when this will be on the agenda to the community, because I know I sat on that same committee with Bruce several years ago, and the community input was valuable. And so I think making sure that we can hear from the community is really, really important. Switch back to my agenda.
I was the district employee, was part of the conversation as well.
You want me to- Yes, please.
Go ahead, Howard.
Hi, good evening. My name is Hawa Abdullah. I am the ELL intake and assessment for the district. And this topic is very, I'm glad that we're talking about this. And I know it's been a long time since the other person introduced. The reason why this is a great way, because I had a family today that I was working with who happened to move to Connors District, but they were already attending Montello. So the family, we tried to figure out the transportation. We couldn't. So the family don't have no choice but to go to Connors. But, it puts them in a situation where the parent decided to say, okay, I will do the transport back and forth to Montello. And I mean, we still need to give the parent an option to choose what location, what district. And I think it's a great idea that if, mixing all the districts together and for example, this family, the parent was, he really wanted his child to stay in Montello because, the child started pre-K there, and it's kind of sad for the child to leave and go to Connors and not graduate with his cohort. So this is a great discussion that we're having. I hope we can do something about it and then give parents an option to where to go to schools. Thank you for bringing this discussion.
Showing my age a bit, I was a former student. Kurt has been in the district as a valued employee for several years now.
We want to take a brief recess before we transition to the real meeting? school committee will, the regular scheduled school committee will start at 7:11 PM with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
The United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And number 2 are school committee member introductions. We'll start with Bobby, and then is Omar still on? I know he was.
I don't think so.
He's not. Okay, so we'll start with Bobby and then Karen and go around the table.
Bobby Avery, Chief Administrative Officer.
Karen Puckett, assistant superintendent.
Bruce Stamen, Ward 1.
Well, Jeff is Ward 2.
Karen Majerus Collins, Ward 3.
Jake Leitner, Superintendent.
Megan Parks at large.
Tanya Whitlow, Ward 4.
Linnea Hawkins, Ward 5.
Ron Podben, Ward 6.
Paul Vogelon, Ward 7.
Alicia Ray, City Council Representative.
Thank you. Agenda item number 3 is the COVID-19 update.
I don't have a big update right now. Looked at some dates to do the forum so we can share the state guidelines that are existing. And so I'll be sharing a date out to give people a chance to have beforehand notice so that they can join that discussion if they'd like. And I'll do a forum on that coming up here in the next week or so. And vaccinations has been a heavy topic. I don't know how many people have seen the news recently, but a decision was made and announced late last week that the state of Maine is fully adopting an age-based approach to vaccine dissemination. And we've been in contact already with some community medical partners who have said, let us know who those folks are for you, and we will do our best to reach out. Bobby and her team have helped build that list so that we can, by age, share with our partners so that we can at least facilitate the opportunity for folks to get vaccinated as soon as possible. But it is based on age. And so teachers might get some prioritization with certain timeframes that are more flexible for teachers. One item in discussion, for example, is after school hours on a Friday or Saturdays, where they might take teachers and try to expedite them so that it doesn't disrupt school. But again, that's one thing that we've been in discussion about. Our local hospitals have been phenomenal in communicating and talking about options and keeping schools high on that list. And so we continue to make that effort. And as things become available, they actually do a lot of the work for us. When the age bracket becomes available, they'll communicate with them to set up appointments. So again, that's a lift that they're doing with data that HR and obviously have provided us so that we can at least facilitate the process for those who wish to be vaccinated. I don't have any updates beyond that. I know that new vaccines are one being approved and some others that may be coming down the pipeline that are one shot instead of two. That could be beneficial in the long run. I'll leave that to medical professionals, and we're going to just try to do the best that we can to facilitate that practice. As far as numbers within our schools, certainly was a big one last week was McMahon. It started with one student that had symptoms and was tested and became positive, and that spilled into some other siblings. And so spread over multiple grades and multiple crossover components that included unified arts. So students that went to gym, students that were in cafeteria, students that were at art, students that were at the library. And when we started doing that, we established close contacts. The number of people impacted at McMahon School, it became impossible for us to staff it and run it as we should. So they have gone remote. That will go through this week. And this mixed level of close contacts. I want to note publicly, in case people didn't have a chance to see the letter, that some of those close contacts that made staff unavailable actually had nothing to do with school. There were close contacts outside of school, family members, other folks, other places, what have you. Story is a little bit unique, but it made them be quarantined actually just before this popped up with McMahon last week. So staff will be coming back at different times, and we should be, as far as things are reported right now, okay to start back up after this week. All those dates have been shared, and if there's any change, we'll let people know. I will say, some like the decision, some did not. But last week, when the first case came up, because we knew there were siblings, we took the approach of an abundance of caution, and we had a couple of teams of teachers and their students be remote Thursday and Friday. And as it turned out on Thursday, I believe it was, it may have been Friday, we found out that those other two students, at least one initially, and then being both, were in fact positive. So those close contacts, I guess what I'm saying is the steps that we have taken as a district through the guidance of the committee is to practice that abundance of caution. And when we did that last week, I believe it prevented a community spread of it. And so that's a positive, great scheme of things. Other than that, numbers seem to be relatively low. We had the opportunity to work with our partners to look at the calendar to see another date that we could do optional testing for staff. We had one on Thursday, the 18th, towards the end of break. We had, I believe, 29 staff choose to be tested. That all went really well. We have the system down. And one other piece is we have the Buy Next Now cards in district. Our lead nurse, Wendy Burgoyne, has been great throughout this pandemic. Recently reached out to me and said, hey, we're getting word from the state that these things might be available. We do a little paperwork. She took care of that. I signed off on some things. We thought there might be a little bit of cost. Ends up that the grant covered it. And so we are now getting the Buy Next Now cards, which is a more rapid test that we can use if we have staff that develop symptoms. It's only for staff that develop symptoms. It's not a security blanket for travel or things of that nature. And so we have shared with building principals to keep a pulse on staff who might say, geez, I'm not feeling so good. I might need to go home, or I didn't come in today because I'm having symptoms. We can work with our nurses and that building administrator to facilitate a test for them if they wish, and do it in a way in which it doesn't create close contacts at the school. And so we have that option now available to us. There's one more tool.
Did you ever hand up? Yes.
I
Sorry.
just wasn't sure if we were moving on to questions.
Yes, I said that, sorry. I just
Great,
didn't
so
say it loud enough. I
yeah.
apologize.
I just had a couple. So I was wondering if you could go a little deeper on the vaccination issue, and specifically, my understanding was that there was a possibility that school districts are going to be either running their own or affiliated with their own specific clinics to prioritize school employees within an age group. Is that happening? I mean, I think that would be starting on Wednesday, right?
Yeah, so they did say, was it the second or the third, I forget, but that there are specific health institutions that would work with specific entities. We haven't had to go search for that. The partners that we've been working with closely connected to St. Mary's and such, they have already reached out and said, here's how we can help facilitate this. So that partnership with our local medical facilities is already there. So
That's really encouraging. And as we move towards more robust rates of vaccination, and once we're past a small number, it would be great to get a sense of how things develop in terms of the number of vaccinations that are being deployed to school staff, and that would be really helpful to know going forward. The other question I had is that some folks have expressed some concern that despite the fact the school committee voted at our last meeting resoundingly to continue with the model as currently presented, that there was some discussion of changing density requirements. Can you reassure staff that that is not something that we're considering?
I have not seen or heard anything from the state of Maine about changing the density requirements. So as a large district with a large enrollment, we do not have great flexibility to just add kids back to great extents. And other barriers that we have a lot of students in our district that ride the bus. Those densities have not been changed. Those expectations remain. It's a little different for some districts that are smaller than us. They can do some things a little differently with staffing and with their patterns because the enrollments are so much smaller. In a district of this size, shifting that model is not something we can just do because of the guidelines. I think the forum will help move that conversation.
Agenda item number 4, the consent agenda. Are there any items that members would like removed? Seeing none, the consent agenda is adopted. Agenda item number 5, to receive and approve the nomination of the RTI and Special Programs Supervisor at Montello. We're going to bring in Jim Cliff and Allison. Yes, please.
Jim Cliff and Allison Hopkins coming to join us. Just a little bit of history. One of our, who I think is a very, very good Lewiston Public Schools employee, Steve Maroon, who held this position at Montello prior. His tentacles started to spread elsewhere, and when we had that position available to us as a district at the central office to again work with that approach. We talk about remediation, we talk about data, we talk about programming specifically and targeted in ways that we can measure to see success, so we know how to budget and fund around things. Steve became that candidate for that position, and when he took that at the district level, he created an opening. And he's a pretty dynamic person, but I believe that Principal Cliff has found someone that's pretty dynamic herself to take on that challenge. And Principal Cliff, did you want to share anything to start?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, I'm really pleased to just share briefly. This is a really critical position at Montello. It's a really unique position. And as Jake said, we've had the same person doing it for 6 years who was really vision driven and has really helped Montello to design a strong RTI system and some really exceptional after school and summer programming. And so there were some pretty big shoes to fill. We had a really strong candidate pool, which we were really excited about, and a really thoughtful interview team, which included myself, 2 assistant principals, 2 classroom teachers, one from the primary grades and one from the upper grades, as well as an RTI teacher, one of our ed techs, and 1 member of our team was from the central office staff. So we had a really thoughtful group and what we think was a pretty rigorous deep dive in the interview process. And from that process, we have identified Allison Hopkins for your consideration for our RTI and special program supervisor position. I'm sure she'll fill in the history a little bit more than I can, but she is currently a mathematics coach at Connors School. She has taught at both elementary and middle school grade levels. And prior to that work, teaching, she was actually a IEP coordinator with Child Development Services. So, a fairly, there's a community component there. And then just really briefly, what we discovered in our interview process with Allison is that she has a real sound understanding of instruction as well as response to intervention systems design. She recognizes and values the importance of a shared leadership model and is ready to collaborate with our staff in not only carrying out the programs we have in place right now, but to also really further develop those and take them perhaps to new places. So we're really excited about that. And I hope you will support this nomination.
I told Allison there'd be a number of really hard questions from the committee before her nomination was received. I didn't know if there was a motion instead.
Mr. Ramirez-Collins.
I move that we receive and approve the nomination of Allison to be the new RTI and special program supervisor at Montello.
Second. Any discussion? Mr. Mr. Driscoll.
Welcome to Lewiston, at
We,
least in this role.
because member Physic was absent last week, we had moved past his spot for starting the vote, so we'll go back and we'll start all votes tonight with Ward 2 for the evening. So Ward 2,
Yes.
3,
Yes.
4,
Yes.
5,
Yes.
6,
Yes.
7,
Yes.
Ms. Wright,
Yes.
yes, Mr. Day.
Yes.
Motion to approve Allison as our new vice chair position at Montello. Passes 9-0. Congratulations, Allison.
Would you like to speak, Allison?
Yes, sorry. Thank you all very, very much for this opportunity. As a longtime employee of LPS, as a member of the community, I'm also an LHS alum and a Montello alum. I'm just really excited to be able to continue to support our students and be a part of the Montello family. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Can I ask one thing of her? She's still there.
She's still there, yes.
Allison, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Would you kindly, in your own words, when we do these positions, I get a lot of questions from the public of exactly what these positions are and what do they do. Can you, in your own words, describe what your job's gonna be and what you're gonna be doing to the public in layman's terms?
Yeah, so I see my role as sort of a part of the leadership team at Montello and a person who really takes a look at student achievement as well as social emotional data. And with the collaboration of the leadership team, the admin team, coaches, teachers, just to be able to support the work to make movements for students to increase achievement. As another part of the job, I would also be responsible for working with a team to implement successful summer programming, and that would also be driven greatly by some of our student achievement data that we are seeing, and it would also encompass an enrichment component as well.
Very good, thank you.
Questions? Thank you, both Allison and Jim. Agenda item number 6, public input. Members of the public may address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now or on agenda items later. Comments that pertain to staff, personal matters, or a student issue should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comments shall be directed to the school committee and be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Before starting, please state your name, address, or affiliation with Lewiston Public Schools. No one in person. Are there any attendees online that would like to speak? None. We will move to agenda item number 7, which is the report from our student representatives. And I don't think Omar has returned yet.
Oh, our two student representatives, I believe Gemma has practiced tonight at academics, and Omar had shared that he has a lot of homework, so he was here for a while, but he has stepped away.
Agenda item number 8, to receive and discuss the fiscal year 2022 budget overview. Sorry.
I just have one thing on agenda item 7.
Yes.
And that's just for the consideration of our student representatives. I was wondering if we could potentially move that up in future agenda items, just so that they can offer the report and then leave to get on with their lives if they want to. If there's a way to do that, maybe COVID-19 update or something like that, just as an idea.
I think we used to do it closer to the end, so they had an opportunity to participate in the whole meeting, but it does make sense if they have heavy academics.
Yeah, I mean, they should feel welcome to stay through the whole thing, but I also understand how high school is, so, you know.
So agenda item number 8, to receive and discuss the budget overview.
Drops off online when we start talking about the budget.
So I have a few slides just to get us started, but the whole thing won't be slides. And I think throughout this process, I want to throw out a bit of a disclaimer, if that's the right phrase. From this side of the table, from this side of the budget, even though I've been a bit of a budget geek throughout my administrative career, many of you have seen me at tons of meetings because I just follow this stuff. I really enjoy it. It's an area that I really come to understand and know prior to taking on this role. What I've come to learn is this side of the budget process is vastly different from the administrative absorption side of the cycle of the budget. And so I've learned a ton in a very short period of time. I continue to learn. Working with Karen and Bobby around the budget has been invaluable experience, and we'll continue to work through it. Working with the finance committee has been very helpful to understand some of the ins and outs of the wants and the, have you thought of this? It's been very good for reflective practice and also for some direction. And also in a more broad sense, I think this committee and retreats and other platforms has done a good job saying, I'd like to see this, I'm wondering about that. And so the effort to support students is very prevalent. So I'll go through the slides to start, then we'll jump into the memo and I'll walk through that. Tonight is about an overview. You have your binders in front of you. You can see the different tabs. I provided you a copy of my initial budget overview memo in hard copy form, but also to your email electronically if you'd like to give that a look. Again, I'll do a few slides real quickly. And what I'm asking of the finance committee, Karen and Bobby, is to chime in when appropriate. I want this to be an open dialogue process, and I don't want anyone to feel like they can't chime in when they feel they need to. I've seen different processes over the years, and some are driven and fast-paced, and I know we have a lot to cover, but I also know that we need to take the time and make the time to resolve things through this cycle, to make sure that we bring forth a budget that meets the needs of our students to the best of our ability, and that carries forward a responsibility that we know we have to our community. So, without further ado, I'll just jump in. I want to start with a thank you. Our staff have done things that have never been asked to do before to keep our students engaged. So I want to start by thanking our staff. Our community for supporting education, not just financially, but understanding, especially this year, there's going to be some ebbs and flows, and we're doing the best work that we can. Parents for their flexibility as we navigate these times, and really our students. Probably the most adaptive people in this whole process have been our kids, who have shown up, who wear their masks, who are mindful of distancing, who follow the rules that we put in front of them. Our kids have really been amazing, so I thank them for that. The resiliency they've shown. Education may not look the same this year, they may not test the same, but our kids have learned something this year that you might not be able to answer on assessments. And then to all of you, our school committee that has clearly remained focused on improving how we program as best we can with the resources available for our kids. And so thank you for taking on some tough items. We worked through a lot of things. Focus areas I share with school leadership. So at the start of the budget process, building administrators are reaching out to me and other directors in our district and saying, what are some things you're looking for in the budget? We're starting to talk to our team. We're starting to get input from our teachers and our leadership teams. What do you want, Jake? What are you looking for? And I said, I'm asking you for a couple of things, just to narrow the focus, because I know that this budget cycle is going to be pretty tight. The first one is plan for our most vulnerable. When we do that, we have an opportunity to improve our economy and our future, and obviously our community. But I ask you, please, when you submit items and request in the budget, I want you to plan for our most vulnerable. And then remediation. We know that school's been disrupted since last March. And so I asked them to plan for remediation. What's it going to take for you as you get the pulse of your students and talking to your teachers and your staff? What's it going to take over the next couple, maybe 3 years, to try to get this thing back on track as COVID hopefully dissipates and leaves us sooner than later. I'm just going to rattle off a quick list of things that, to me, started to show themselves as core areas that we should lead in with. obviously the pandemic, teachers have changed fundamentally how they work each day. We've taken a never before seen look at needs, equipment, supplies because of the relief funds. Never in education in all of my years has someone said, here's money, you gotta follow these rules and you gotta spend it now. On 2 or 3 different occasions. And that happened. And there's new ventilation in places. There's new materials. There's multicultural materials for kids because we needed books, but we also want to get the right books. We've never before taken a look at things like we have. So that plays into our conversation. We had a budget last year that was reduced for the referendum that was delayed by COVID. That went, I believe, July 15th last summer. And right around there. Might have been July 13th, I don't know. My point is that when that budget was passed, it was passed with, I'll use the word deep consideration for the overall pandemic puzzle. City had needs, schools had needs, what was the funding gonna look like? And we passed a budget as a community that, in my opinion, was a lowball number that could have been higher, that could have supported kids differently. The reason I bring that up, that adopted budget being smaller last year, makes some of the work that we want to do this year look like a big step. But really what happened last year is we didn't take much of a step at all. And so this next one looks like we're taking a big one. We have unexpended funds as carryover. This year, a number that I sat down with was a big one. This wasn't our doing per se. Pandemic probably played into it some, but we have a big carryover number, and in the grand scheme, I think it's something we want to reduce. We have an increase in state subsidy this year. It's about 2% from last year. But as part of that configuration, the local money that is required was reduced. So our state percentage went up, but our local percentage went down. Debt service. We have some existing debt service, and I'll talk more about that. But I'll also talk about our high school expansion, which is going great. There's a cost to it. I do believe it's time that we better serve our English language learners. For many years, our ELL office has said, we need this, we need that to do this better. And for many years, we have, I wouldn't say we've kicked the can down the road, but I guess we have to an extent, but we've also said, these are tough decisions to make. And year after year, some decision got made, and some of our language learners didn't get the resources that we should be providing. And we have some fixed contractual growth through salaries and benefits that are there. We have contracts that are signed, they're in place, and there's some increases coming. Just a few quick pictures from our expansion. Top right is just a color footprint of coming off the main part of the front lobby of Lewiston High School, where that building is currently going up. The bottom left is a picture from not too long ago. I believe it was in the Times locally, and I shared that picture. I thought the article was a nice one, and it also demonstrated that the project's going well, it's on time, and it's on budget, which is due to the hard work that's involved. And then the bottom right is just a rendering from the parking lot off the ground here a bit, so you can kind of see the facade. And that big blue entryway that's squared out will be full of the word welcome and other welcoming phrases from multiple languages. And so when we talk about trying to make our schools more welcoming, that was obviously a topic. So I want to thank all the folks that are involved in that, and especially publicly Mr. Dufour, who's been the chair of that expansion committee, continues to work tirelessly to that effort. He's done a lot of good work with that, so I thank him for it. So next, we'll begin at the front of our binders. I provided you a copy. I don't know if you want to put it in or leave it out, but I'm gonna work through that. I'm gonna stop the share in case Bobby or Member Ray have any questions or comments they want to share or bring up. And I want to very much avoid reading to you. I've been here a long time. I'm not a great public reader anyway. there's some things I will read, but if it's getting to be a little too much Jake read, please say, Jake, we got it. You don't have to read it to us. So just as an introduction, in the top part of this, this overview, we have the dates of our meetings. We have the carve out times and places. As we get closer to the 22nd, we'll solidify some things, but through communication with the city administrator, that meeting will be with the city joining us, and we'll still follow this format, and the city can choose to either come or join us via Zoom. So we'll plan for that. And then as we press forward, you can see the other dates. But I want to emphasize to anybody watching or listening or watching this recording later, public comment is welcome. We want you to come. We want you to get online. We want you to share with us your thoughts about the budget and the process. We'll present the budget on the 13th to the city. That will be their platform. We'll follow them at their meeting. And then it goes to vote on May 4th with the city council. And then ultimately to the voters referendum is scheduled for May 11th. Our overall summary, our next heading, I make mention again to some of the great work that our staff is doing. And again, I can't thank teachers, ed techs, and our support staff enough. They really are doing great work. When we initially did our budget, and I asked principals and directors and leadership in our district to take a look at those different areas of focus and bring things back to us, in addition to that was obviously David from instructional technology. We changed his world this year by going one-to-one. So he has needs. He got everybody a computer, but he has needs. And we've addressed some of them, but there are ongoing things that we'll consider. Facilities, Josh Pro, our director, he's pretty familiar with our infrastructure, and he knows some needs that are rising to the top of the surface. And so all of those things came in to Bobby, Karen, and I, and Bobby put them all to sheets, and I don't know how many hours Bobby has into this, probably somewhere around hundreds. But when Bobby put all of those requests, all of those what I think were reasonable, responsible requests into the budget, and we did the math, it came out to $104 million. I did not feel comfortable bringing a $15+ million increase to this budget, to this group. So what we did was we found areas in which we believe, because we have to or should be considering moving forward with a responsible budget that still asks of our community, but to provide you with the things that we called out in the process so that you can have input on them. And so those are provided in the packet as well. As I mentioned, the state subsidy this year is a 2% increase, but the local minimum share went down $144,000+. So we reduced a fair amount in this, and we shared those items with you, most of them. And by most, it was a process of iteration. So in that first iteration, it was things that I said to Bobby, I think we can live without these pieces. And then Karen threw in some pieces, and then Bobby took a deeper dive at things that we felt, because of the numbers, we need to make some tough choices. And so I want to thank Bobby for the help in that process. Just a little caveat for me, to be honest with you, cutting $5 million from requests is not that hard. It's not that emotional. When you get beyond that, and you know the needs of our kids, and you're starting to look at things that are continuing and not new, it's real hard. It's real hard work. So when we go down, you can see that this budget as proposed results in a $2.5 million shortfall. And we have a couple of options as to how we can bridge this. And those options include a further reduction in expenditures to lower our proposed budget. And it could be some combination of that with what is as proposed right now, the number we got from the city with $1.46 add to the tax rate. So 14% increase, 14 plus. And so when I bring up earlier about last year's budget versus this year's budget, those numbers creep up in size because of what we didn't do last year. Things that we took out of this. There's some new items and some pretty major existing ones. Professional development, monies that were there. Pulled out. Curriculum, monies that were there and monies that we need to properly outfit our classrooms. Some of it's taken out. Extended school year, extended school day, which I'll talk about in depth in a few minutes, taken out. Technology and infrastructure maintenance and repair. Things that people need. Not all of it, but a lot of things taken out. So expenses right now in this proposed budget are increasing with a rise in increases at 6.99%. This is made mostly of salary and benefits, our debt service, again, high school expansion, it's another $1 million of debt service. So when you look at that $1 million, when you have our budget, that's a $1 million increase. And again, we have needed increases in resources to support our language learners, our English language learners. The increase to salary is not just about collective bargaining agreement. The increase in salaries is a state mandate. So in this budget cycle, we have to appropriate for a new minimum teacher salary of $37,500. And then in future years, we'd have to build up to the $40,000 minimum salary. To that end, what Bobby has told me several times, and I believe her 100%, she needs time, sometime after this budget cycle, to sit down and look at these state requirements, salaries, benefits, other variable costs that reoccur annually, so kind of fixed but more variable, and schedule out multiple years so that we collectively can be looking ahead and have an idea of what these things are going to cost and have it inform the decisions we're going to make. So one of the things that I've pledged to her is that we'll find that time. And that's a month of work for her, likely. And so we're trying to carve that out maybe in the summer. But it would be good to have a forecast of this is what your salary numbers are going to do. So we have that information. Some other items that you'll see in here as we look forward, there's some unbudgeted positions from this school year, which you're familiar with, you've approved them. There's also proposed new positions in music, art, English language learner instruction and support, computer science, which is a quickly growing field, and our kids are gravitating towards it. Volleyball, student engagement, and others. And so just to give you a quick snapshot of some of those new positions that were not already authorized, we have a Portuguese interpreter translator. Again, this is a direct reflection to increased numbers in our community of families who speak Portuguese as a native language. We put in here 4 teachers to continue the ELMS model, which for a lot of kids, it's really, really working. There are a lot of kids that really like that model. And so we're looking to continue that. Looking to add a music teacher. We've got a great expansion. We've got a great idea behind the arts. But our community is rooted in expression and culture. And we need to grow that in our district. So you'll see a number of positions here that are connected to both visual and performing arts. Drama, improvisation, or theater teacher at the high school. Nice classroom up there on the top floor. Looking for an ed tech to support the work of the store next door to go along with Jamie's position that was approved earlier this year. Establish a day treatment program to reduce the number of students sent out of district to save costs. Administrative secretary at Longwood for growing programming. We have someone there now that's assisting, but the way in which they're being funded, this is something that we probably want to change and do with them anyway. Computer science programming coordinator, instructional specialist to support curriculum. And going back in time, I think we've been hyper-focused on today's problem, which I think pandemics do to us, and the learning process of my newness and Karen's newness. But one thing that we never did when we made Karen assistant superintendent, when we created that structure that should be in place for a district this size, we never hired anyone from the position that she was doing. So she's still trying to do all of that and be an assistant superintendent. And so we're looking for ways to build that out. And one of those ways is the instructional specialist. And for those of you who are on the curriculum subcommittee, you've seen the 5-year plan around curriculum, and we have that for your packet that we'll share with you on Wednesday. Assistant Human Resources Director. One of the first questions I asked Bobby back in summer, how do you do it? The idea that we don't have an Assistant Human Resources Director for a district that has over 1,000 staff is interesting to me. So I reached out to superintendents in local areas, and every district our size has multiple people working with the HR director. And we have a couple that help facilitate that work, but we don't have some of the qualifications of an assistant HR director. So we're asking for that to help with that process. And Bobby, correct me if I'm speaking out of turn, but it would let Bobby do her job, the HR director do her job, our business manager do her job, and this whole thing will run better. And the reason I can make this pitch for this is right now, the best thing we can do for our staff is take care of them. And right now, we're understaffed in a way that's hard to take care of. I don't want to disregard the work that our folks that are in place do, because they're amazing. Poetry Out Loud advisor. Sorry, I missed a couple of their project manager to carry out facilities related work. We looked at LCIP funds, we looked at some other projects, even if we can acquire the funding, especially with some of this federal relief dollars. Our facilities director, Josh, is very busy all the time. So when I say, Bobby, can you ask Josh about putting ventilation in Montello? Their office doesn't have ventilation. So she goes to ask him, who's going to run that project? Who's going to look after those quotes, those details, the follow through, the look after? So we have these new dollars, but we don't have anyone to do the work. And I would imagine, I know David Terrio sitting in the room, is the director of instruction technology, he'll tell you, so much of his last 6 months have not been what his job is. It has been for, putting in the paperwork, finding the quotes, acquiring materials, getting it, the software done, and then getting it all distributed. He's willing to do it, but it also means he's not able to do the other. So we're looking for a project manager to carry out some of those facilities related items. May not be a long-term position, but I think so long as it will be functionality. Advisory program stipend for Lewiston High School. They have a program called Devil's Advocate. Advisory, mentoring, building relationships with students, things that we all believe in, building dialogue around race, equity, and bias, having conversations around social, emotional wellness, and well-being. We did all that work in advisory. Right now, there's someone that's doing it, but they're volunteering. And there's no stipend for that person, so we're looking to add that. Robotics team started 2 years ago. They've had some success. They've enjoyed it a great deal. Our kids are thriving in that environment. Again, those advisors were voluntary, and we're looking to fill that work. Next one is an athletic assistant / trainer. This one's complex. I can support all day the value of what athletics and other co-curriculars do for our students. But I will say that we are burning people out because we don't have enough staff in that space. You should also know, we can talk about this much deeper when we go through the articles. This is connected to a trainer. For years, we have worked with organizations to get a trainer in-house to work with our students during different activities and sport windows. Those companies that we worked with in the past are changing the way they do their business. And they're doing it in such a way, and I hope to have Mr. Fuller here to help explain it better. We got to do one thing or the other, because we have to have a trainer available. What Jason Fuller, our athletic director, has proposed is if we take this approach, from a cost perspective, it's responsible, but it does both things. When we talk about trying to keep the lights on for kids, someone to figure out the schedule, someone to provide another opportunity and supervision, this is a step in that direction. We can't have one person doing all that. Volleyball stipend and supplies. Volleyball was pitched to you last year, back when I was the principal of the high school. And again, this is highly supported by the student body, and we can talk about that more later. And then we have two unified sports. This is through our Special Olympics and special activities related affiliations. But in an effort to become a unified school, which you need to meet certain criteria to fully welcome all of our students regardless of ability. A couple things we can do that are cost next to nothing if we approve volleyball, is to have volleyball and also flashball. Here's some statistics around enrollment. Our enrollment is down this year, and it's down some. This is a trend throughout the state, but it could have financial implications in the future. My understanding is what the state did this year through EPS and the ED 279, they did some prorating around the primary school age kids. I don't know their exact formula. They don't just come out and say it, but they prorated it in a way that landed us with a 2% increase, which means to me, they're factoring the upper level kids who have chosen to do school differently or to be home because of the pandemic. And so whether the students are not engaging, or they're joining virtual schools or other part of education to be homeschooled, I do think that will rebound in Lewiston. Some of our smaller districts may not have. Next page, we have just the budget summary and the draft budget, tab 1 is summarized here. And again, reiterating, we're looking at this proposal being $94,809,487. This 7% increase from last year's proposed budget.
Jake, is there a schematic for the public to be able to see this that you can put up there?
We'll have it up on the website, or I can share my screen, but then we can't see Alicia, Bobby, and to see if they want to chat. But we will get this up on our website. And going down through the chart that I have available here on this table, you can see that I put in some notes to reference different areas that I discussed later on in the memo. And you can see the breakdown. A couple of things to point out: the local minimum tax, which is the top line, that's that famous local minimum share. Any dollar we don't raise to that amount, we lose 3 in the funding formula. It might even be more than 3 now. The state has gone up 2%. So we can do some math there, but any number we don't raise of the 18,387,513 locally, we're going to give money back to the state. There's also debt service. You can see that the 1.3 is there. That's former debt service that is slowly going down. You can see 21 is at 1.4, and then you see the $1,005,000 is around the high school expansion. So that debt service is. And when we say debt service, these are just things that have been bonded, approved at referendum or by our voters in this budget, prior budgets, or the capital improvement plans. And in those efforts, we do take on debt and we have a bill to pay. And so that's how that's working. Again, those items have already been approved in referendum. This budget, on top of the local minimum tax, has an additional local tax, and that's the 2.486 number that you can see. You can see the state contribution number, and then the next item down is unexpended funds. And I'll talk about this more when we get closer to it. And that number is $5.9 million in unexpended funds. It is a number that, through discussion and conversation, is too big to use this year. When we did the math, we put it on here because it's something that I need you all to be aware of and know about and consider. But the way this works is whatever we use there, we have to have fund balance next year to do the same thing. And if it's less, it is just less. What I mean by that is if we use 5.9 this year, which is not my recommendation at the end of the budget cycle, we don't have 5.9 next year. We have less than that carryover, at least we believe. I know once the bills are all done. Anything we use there is a potential for a significant cut in the future if that money isn't there. Other revenue you can see is down. I'll talk about that briefly, but if you think of things like if someone rents the cafeteria to do a thing, you know, there's a little rental that comes in, that money's considered revenue. And so right now our facilities are not available for the public to rent. We hope to change that at some point down the road, but right now that number's down. So I'll jump down to the total, again, budget is that 94,809, and last year's approved budget for FY21 is 88,6. You can see the difference of a $6 million ask of 7%. Next section here, I have a discussion around the local property taxes, that mill rate. So if we, through our work, let's say hypothetically, we are adding things in and not taking things out, any add there is an add directly to the taxpayer and the mill rate. Also in your book, you'll see the ED 279, which is kind of education speak for how much money should be available to most public schools. They break it down by your demographics, by the number of teachers they think you should have by formula, the number of students you have that have different criteria, that have different subsidies. And so that's how that breaks down. Another reminder that our local minimum share was reduced by 144,276, which is good to our local tax base, but it's $144,000 of school department that we don't have. Unexpended from the prior year, I want to touch on this as a keynote. This figure represents that unexpended fund carryover. It would be my goal in this process that we find ways to reduce spending that much from that area because of the implications it has next year, the year after. We can talk about that more. But this also gets into that space where when Bobby has the time, we have to make that time for her to project out. I think project is a word she doesn't like to use because it's financially not the right term. I keep saying project, but she can build these schedules so we know really, really close what next year, the year after, and the year after might look like from a salary benefits perspective, from a healthcare perspective, and things of that nature.
Sorry, go ahead. Mr. Wright.
Thank you. I just wanted to jump in before we got too far past it. The LPS Enrichment and Resource Coordinator position that was unbudgeted and then approved. When was that approved?
So that is Jamie's position.
Okay. I don't think we've ever called it that before because it's not in any of our past agendas. So I was just like, who is this person? That's super helpful. Thank you.
So looking at, again, that unexpended amount, this carryover is too high. Most districts try to be somewhere around 2%, maybe 3%. We're carrying far too much in carryover. And this gets generated oftentimes in various districts when you have a number of positions that have been approved, but you're unable to fill them. So how do you stop that cycle? And one of the ways you stop that cycle is you start taking a hard look at those vacancies, those unfilled positions that have been kind of continued on year after year, and you start looking for ways to reduce them, if at all you can. And so you'll also see further down in this budget, part of our reductions efforts, that there's over $500,000 worth of unfilled vacancy positions that have been reduced. And actually, I think the total number ended up being just over $600,000 in those positions. And we talked to building leaders, we talked to our special ed department about those positions. None of them are easy, but right now they remain unfilled. We do have a number of special education positions that are unfilled, but we're filling about 2/3 of them every day with substitutes from our district. There's also somewhat of a cost savings there because of benefits around. That could also contribute to those unexpected cuts. Other revenue, which I mentioned, and then Moving down, we have unbudgeted positions that were authorized. And just to fill those in, instructional technology staff, that number there to represent those. Again, tribute to David and his team, the work that they did this fall was amazing. And the work that they'll be able to do with better staffing ratios will be good work.
And these people been hired.
I believe two have been.
The assistant director starts March 10th. And the tier 2 has already started, but has to remain in the tier 1 role a little bit until we can hire somebody to replace his position, which we've already posted. So, and the tech integrator position looks like it's probably just not great timing at this point in the year, and that maybe as we get to the spring, when teachers are out looking for a new opportunity, that we'll get more applicants.
Thank you. And we have the one position that Member Ray brought up. That's store next door position that the committee created. Working with language on that. So I think if we dug into our documents, I believe it's a student resource coordinator. There's been other language used around that committee and that effort, and what that person has been hired to do. But we're really looking at how we can enrich our students who are accessing education and how we can provide those resources. So a little play on that, Member Ray, is really about how the conversation is morphing to what they're going to provide, but try to avoid stigma around that. And then the last one, which we just did recently, a position and a half around payroll staffing, and that's a position and a half because of existing funds that was approved. And those approved positions are there at a $306,000 increase to our budget. We're able to fund those this year using unexpended funds for vacant positions. But again, those would need to be funded, especially with the reductions that we. So with the proposed budget initially coming in at over $104 million, that's a $15 million plus increase. And so we started to go through and had to make some tough choices. And there's different reasons behind different pieces. I will say that while this list is here, it's not all encompassing. There are some other items, or I've collapsed them so that this wasn't 25 pages long. So you might see things like math teacher, and was not going to say is that math teacher was unfilled and can be lived without. And what we've done is, or I got is either collapsed and or condensed other itemized areas for that individual. So you're not going to see math teacher and then math teacher insurance and then math teacher retirement. So I'm trying to condense those things so this isn't forever long. But I want you to understand that those items are pulled out of here. And I may touch on it again, but one of the other things that I learned in the process, and it's tricky for me to fully understand, is healthcare is a cost that we don't know. And so what Bobby did is she proposed a responsible number. And you'll see that in your details when you go through. The problem with that number is not knowing the future of what they might say it is, and seeing such a tight revenue and expenditure relationship. I've asked Bobby to reduce that healthcare number, and it's a reduction, but we don't know what that number will be. So what could happen down the road is we find that number is higher than we anticipated, and we have to figure it out. That information sometimes comes as early as the end of March, and sometimes comes as late as early May, I believe. Is that right, Bobby? You?
I would expect to get it at the beginning of May, end of April, beginning of May.
But to give you a reference, and Member Collins has asked in advance, items that you cut that you know kids need, please bring them to the committee. And so what I've tried to do here is by organization. So whether it's a school or an area or a thing, I've listed out for you a number of things that we have, again, reduced in this budget. Not all of these things are new requests. I want to be very clear with you. There's a number of things in here that are not new. They are existing items that carry forward, that will typically be carried forward, and we have reduced them because we believe that we can live without them. And I would much rather preserve existing staff who come to work every day than a piece of equipment or something to that effect. Having said that, I know there's infrastructure concerns that we have. Some of those are not in here. I know the things that David has requested that he needs, those things are not all in here. And you can see other pieces. Two main areas of concern beyond those obvious items I just mentioned are the work we want to do around curriculum. Karen's built a 5-year plan. It involves curriculum. It involves supporting staff to achieve that. It involves the personnel required to help that be successful. And all of those things build up to how we help students grow in very targeted, specific ways so we can raise the academic achievement of our students. Most of that has been pulled out of this budget. The other major area for me is summer school. You see ESD, ESY. ESD is the extended school day, so that's the after-school items. ESY is the extended school year. And I itemized this in the memo, I believe further down. When I talk about how that extended school year is not just summer, it can also be ice week, mud week, that kind of work, which has been a practice that has carried on, and students have found great success in recovering credits in those weeks. And that was in the past, before we had these new gaps because of the pandemic. So the reason I think we can pull some of these things out of this budget is because we have relief funds that can help bridge the gap. But I will say numerous times in this budget cycle, anything like that, that we pull out, that we can use relief funds for, that's good for this year, but it doesn't cover us next time. So any items like this, that ESY and ESD that we pull out, we might save a few bucks this year on the tax credit, but we are positioning ourselves for a hole later that we cannot fill unless we get it. Very uncomfortable with those kinds of decisions, but those are the tough decisions that we have to make, and we do have an opportunity to use relief funds to profit those items. Some other items in here that we'll adjust and we'll look at hard on the way. RTI folks, interventionists, people that can help our kids close the gaps. But those positions don't exist just yet. And again, instead of looking at currently filled positions, we looked at those. Anytime you see vacancy reductions, that's a position that is on the books currently that we're pulling up. So when we talk about those ed techs and those unfilled positions, those vacancy numbers, that's all from different areas. That's what leads up to that $603,000 that has been used.
Just a question, quick question. I noticed that all through here in many places it talks about the SEL coach. Now, is that a stipend piece or is that an actual position?
So the SEL coach was in its design, much like Karen's curriculum plan. Aisha has this vision as a coordinator to say, okay, we know the level of need. There should be a person in each school doing this work, not just someone who gets a stipend on the side. And so when we pulled that together through the teaching and learning office, those were it. And then as we had to go through it, we did reduce them.
So like at the high school, it's basically twice.
It was either two people or in my attempt to collapse, I might have missed one, so that might be a benefit line. Yeah. So for example, in some of these you saw with one reduced position, you'd see like 6 lines because of all the different places. There are other things in here you see, books and periodicals. I've had principals tell me we cannot continue to run school with this limited amount of supply. And so what I said is we can use some relief funds to help with that. But again, when the relief funds are gone, now we're a year, maybe two removed from leadership and teachers saying, I don't have enough materials 2 years ago, never mind now. And so we have to find a way to make that. When you see things like move, class size reduction, teacher, grade, whatever, what happens is in Title Fund, when you have large class sizes, you can, it's permissible, to use those funds to hire a teacher to do things that will help students grow in things like math and literacy. But one of the ways to do that, which is a proven strategy, is to reduce the class size. And so when you see it in here as move, what happened was this was a reactive hire at some point in time. The number was too high. So the school committee that existed at the time would have approved positions or building administrators would have let the superintendent to approve to use title funds, which are not general fund, to hire those positions. So then as time elapses, you find that those teachers are either still in that role, which should now become a general fund item because it's not a title related request, or that person who came in as that kindergarten person is still being coded to the title, but now they're like a secondary teacher because they transferred. But when you follow the paper trail back, the money is still coming out of title funds. The title funds are intended to be used to support kids who are struggling academically. And when you go 2-3 steps removed from that, it gets harder and harder to make that happen. Perfect world, all of those positions of title that are not relatively new within a year or two that were emerged as the way in which to provide these supports to students who are struggling. If they're going to continue, this should be in the locally funded budget. We wanted to do that, we couldn't do that. So what happens is to keep our staff whole, we leave those positions in title. So you have a position in title, it's not a reduction of a person, but it's that chunk of money in title that you cannot use now to provide intervention and supports.
I understand.
Sure.
So those positions, four of them, they're all in Title II right now. And the majority of, other than these class size reduction positions, the majority of Title II funds is used for professional development and any other trainings that we may be able to provide or participate in. So there's this side of that Title II fund that is about the class size reduction, and then the other side of it is for professional development. And when you take up 4 salaries with a chunk of that money, it reduces the amount of money you have for professional development. I think the key thing to know is that the intention is always for those positions to reduce that class size and help in the moment, in a year or two where there's a bubble of kids. And what we've done in this district, as Jake said, is we created those positions several years ago. I'm going to say at least 15, if not more. And what we've done is we've kept those positions in the Title II budget. But in the meantime, we've added positions to the general fund. So we may have said at the time we needed a kindergarten teacher at Montello, or in Montello, they have a kindergarten teacher. And then 5 years ago, the school administration came to the school committee and asked for another kindergarten teacher to further reduce. So what we've done is then we made that change, and recognize that need for an ongoing need, and we haven't removed that position from Title II and said it's something that we need to keep we need this position in our school and in our local budget. And so I just want to give you that a little bit more for that perspective. And that's something, those teaching positions, I'm not by any means saying that we don't need them. What I'm saying is there's something we know we need to support our students, and they should be, in my opinion, they should be part of our local general fund budget with all the other first grade teachers or all the other second grade.
So I'm kind of going through this. I know that you can look at it line for line. There's certainly a number of things that stand out to me, but it all stands out to me. These are all things that either were there before, should have been continuing, but are not. Our in-title funds should come out, but are not. or new requests to conquer that task, those things that I asked people to plan for. How do you plan for your most vulnerable? And how do you provide remediation following it? And so as we move through here, you see some other things just to point out. Lewiston Middle School has done a great job with SEL work this year. They have absolutely primed the pump to have 4 RTI ed techs and to spread them out and to do the work of SEL and closing some of those gaps. They've been reduced. And so those are some of the things that can be a challenge. Impact Academy had requested multiple things, but one thing I want to point out is English, math, science, social studies teachers. One of the things that we found as we looked at this pathway that we're going to continue is we really need more staff, because when you start going 7 through 12, you start going to specialty areas. And you have the best science teacher in the world out there, but they can't, I don't know of anyone that's certified. And I wouldn't ask a professional to teach 7 through 12, including bio, chem, physical, 7th grade, 8th grade, that science field. When you get to high school, you need certifications in a specialized area to issue credits. And so as we looked at that work, we need to talk about that pathway and how we want to bridge some of those gaps. And again, those items have been reduced currently. Number of items in here that you see, again, can be really funded software. So in the world of one-to-one, the amount of software programs and relationships David's established for different tools for our students for education. They all have an agreement, they all have a cost, they all have expectations, and so he manages all of that, but they also potentially could be funded with relief funds. A big conversation that we may have to have at some point in time, and Karen's already planning to have this conversation with teachers on the advisory. Will we or should we, with some research beforehand, make a decision to support one-to-one computing as a district forever or moving forward? Or will we say this was a pandemic need, but we're going to isolate pockets where we think the technology is most important and not have it? It's a major commitment to refurbish, repair, protect, issue, fix, all of that with computers. And I'll be honest with you, I think a lot of offense. I think there's things computers can be very helpful with. I think there's a lot of things computers cannot do. And one thing we've learned from this pandemic is computers can help bridge that gap. And I do think it's appropriate. We have to make sure kids have those skills when they go out to the rest of the world. But I think we've also found that relationships and in-person time with people is probably the most valuable thing. So when we talk about a cost, if I had to cut one thing over the other, I keep choosing working with kids before I would choose computers. Again, certainly appropriate at some periods, I just don't know if it has to be all 12, 13, 14 years. So coming down through this, you may see the restorative practice coordinator at the high school. That is the second one that was put in. So the one that was approved by you all in a prior conversation with SROs back a long ways ago. That position has not been hired this year because of the hybrid model, but it's in there, and that was a second one. So see that. Floating nurse, there was one put in last year. There's actually 2 that live here at Connors. We're looking for another one. We really think that would be beneficial. Again, that's been reduced. A number of items in teaching and learning that I mentioned here, those instructional specialists, and the SEL and equity coordinator. So Aisha's position, that is not funded in the general fund. I'd like that to be in the general fund. I think that's where it belongs. But again, we can sustain her using other funding, but that's where that position belongs. That's you see instructional specialist tier 2, tier 3. That's where we get into the work around things like having a specific focus around an area that we know is important that we're missing. For example, students who are very young struggling with reading. Why are they struggling with reading? What are the language platforms? What are the strategies being used? Is this a dyslexia case? Is this something else? And how we could have someone dedicated to that work so that we can grow both professional development and the services we provide students. And the instructional specialists, obviously teaching and learning, don't take travel. We don't have those positions. We don't do Professional development. You can see the list. We need to invest in our teachers. We will use relief funds to invest in our teachers. We absolutely will. But again, that's finite. Every time I say we can use relief funds for that, and we think about how much we have, and we do have a fair amount, it's gone. And I think it's gone for good reasons and for good investment, but yeah, there's nothing after to sustain some of the measures. Number of items in the business office. Transportation team has done a great job. We had some increases to our work contract that we just approved to move forward with. But they have found ways to save money, and they've put in some of those things here. But when we talk about attendance coordinator, who's going to go help find that student who's currently not engaged in school? So we've got a lot of people trying to do that. But we don't have someone to best what they do. So that's a position that we can expect to do. All in all, and these aren't itemized specifically. If you did all the math on those, it may not equal the 9.9. What I can tell you is that Bobby has done the workbooks to know that it's $9.9 million that has been reduced this way. And of that 9.9, 603,643, so over $500 million in vacant unfilled positions that are currently. I dive into extended school year, extended school day. This next section, again, ESY, ESD, that's kind of ed speak for those extras. Health insurance and benefits. And again, we have that 1.99% increase as that line item. Bobby's put in, again, responsible amounts on individual people as budget increases, but we made a decision to flatly take out a certain chunk of money in the hopes that our health rates come back reasonable. We won't know until May. And again, Bobby, I don't know if you want to add to it. Definitely have concerns that number being at 1.9%.
Yeah, I will emphasize that, Jake, that I don't believe there's enough in this budget. But we won't know for sure for a few more weeks.
Changing pages, a quick note there about transportation. Again, they've done some good work in terms of reroute some things, find some savings, even though we have an increase in our budget cycle. I know there's good support here, and a lot of people have strong passions for supporting our kids. And so that's the gist of my overview. I'll answer any questions you have on specific areas. At the very end, you see an enrollment summary. This also has some demographics breakdown and just for your reference.
So are we planning on doing reclassification of teacher positions that are in Title I or II that shouldn't be there? Are we planning on doing that this year, or we do that at some point?
So in that initial 104, we had done some of that, and then we ended up pulling it out.
What's a 104?
When we first started with $104 million.
Right. Okay.
Sorry, I was trying to review this enrollment study. Doesn't make sense. Okay, Mr. Oblant.
I'd like to commend the administrative team in the preparation of this budget. We all want transparency and stand up to light very well. I was invited to be part of the budget committee by Mr. Hopkins here. My first time seeing figures, all the zeros, my head went crazy. This is from a man that keeps about $10 in his wallet. And I had a hard grasp on it, but it is very good here. I'd like to ask Ms. Ray, if you could here, and you're wearing your council hat now, have you been told by the council in any way what they would look at as an acceptable budget? We'll qualify that question in a moment.
Sure, yeah, we have not broached the subject yet.
Okay, currently we have a 1.46 estimated add to the tax rate, and I just wondered if you were given any directives by the city council on what would be acceptable?
No marching orders have really been delivered yet. I imagine I will present this information to the city side tomorrow during my report out to them. just the preliminary numbers, and they all received their budget packets and binders already. So they may have questions coming forward. I think just for context, Member Bogart, we do not start our budget meetings until the 18th of March. And as you can see from this memo, that's when the school department's wrapping up, kind of. So I think that offset is why it's not really super present in folks' minds yet, but I expect to hear some individual directives this week is what I would say.
Thank you. In anticipation of that, I'd like to go off just for a moment. I try not to speak a little too long, although I love the sound of my own voice, as all of you heard. We were addressed by the Superintendent Brown across the river today on the budget impact of the Auburn School Committee, directing Superintendent Brown, but anywhere where I shouldn't, somebody throw something at me. That the city council was told by the school committee about a 0% tax increase. And the impact of that at Edmund Little was that we are not hiring my position, we are losing an English position, some teacher will lose their job. There will be a loss of a guidance secretary, there will be 3 ed techs farmed out to other schools, which means that kids that need that support will be mainstreamed and not get the support. And I was the first to question Superintendent Brown on that, asking her if there are any members of the city council there or school committee there, because they were the ones I wanted to talk to. And I just want people to know on this that I could not look any member of the Lewiston public school community in the face, from student to staff to administration, if we said, let's lower the tax rate. We need to remember our position in this, that we are advocates for the students' education. And somebody else that might have a bigger hand than I do may make some decisions. I will, I'm still stewing over it. And in my last year, so Superintendent Brown can put my wrath and put another letter in my file that's, I'm sure, you in there already. But it totally irritated me that a school committee would say, no, we're more concerned with lower taxes, and I just paid my tax bill, and there's no money tree in my backyard either, then work to the validity of the of education of students. So, Mr. Ray, I know you're a little spitfire at times, I'm sure you can defend yourself, but we all have differences, we'll all look through this. I, for crazy talk, here looking at it, don't like the idea of cutting warranties. Every time I've had something without a warranty, it busts. I mean, if I have a warranty for 10 years on a water heater, 10 years, 1 month, it goes caca. So, but that's minor. I just really want to say that I'm proud to be on this committee in the short time I've been here, because we are advocates of education, not somebody's wall. And we better stay that way, or I don't know what. I'm not very good on veiled threats. I don't have. Thank you. I had to get that off my chest.
If I may, just to piggyback on Member Oakland's comment, the budget as proposed last year for our referendum was a 41-cent cut.
That's why we're taking such a hit this year.
Mr. Poppin.
Gee, Paul, that's the most I've heard you say since you've been on here, so it's good to see you. Welcome aboard. Get into it. 2 things, Jake, or 3 things actually, real quick. Number 1, as you present a list of $9 million of reductions from what was the original ask, that's sort of like what was proposed to you from the school administration, and you took that number and reduced it by that, and what you're presenting to us on the budget is what you can sleep at night with moving forward to try to pass.
Yes, but I would also say that 9.9 reduction was not just new last. There's additional things in there that we carry forward, including over $500,000 in currently funded positions that are unfilled.
And some are extended, so extended day, extended year. There was money in the general fund currently.
Number 2, one big point, we're asking to increase our budget by $6.1 million. Out of that $6.1 million, I think it's necessary to go over the fact that there's so much mandate that's involved. One being $1 million for the expansion that was publicly approved by referendum out of that. And then the second one is a strong recommendation, working with ELL on what we need to get ELL at a good position at the 1.2. And I think with the constant hits they've been taking over the past 5 years, that it's about time, and I think there's a commitment to that. And I think I like the recommendations because I think that keeps us out of trouble, you know. And I think that's worthy to look at. So the other piece I'm wondering about is the mandate from the state on the 37,000 salary line. I asked in the finance committee, Bobby, if you could break that apart in terms of outside of the salary line, how much was directly associated to this mandate from the state requiring us to put it at 37,000. Do you have that breakdown?
I do.
Yeah, well,
If we remove every single new position, the breakdown is a total of $773,000 or a 2.87% increase.
so it's safe to say that, like it or not, $775,000 basically been told to us by the state we need to spend, right?
I would say yes. You could say that.
So with that in mind, we got 1 million there, 1.2, 2.2, so we're closing in on $3 million. And I really want the public to be aware that $3 million, half of what we're asking, we have no choice on. And at the other $3 million, a lot of it is what's collective bargaining in terms of what we expect for increases each year. And providing, how many employees do we have, Jay?
We're over 1,100, Bobby. I don't know if you know the number off the top of your head, and it fluctuates day to day with hiring and whatnot, but we're over 1,100.
So 1,100, which makes us actually one of the largest employers in the state of Maine. So we should recognize that, and that everybody's going to be getting a raise, collective bargain. So when you give 1,100 employees a raise, regardless of what the negotiated figure is, that's a significant chunk of change out of the remaining 3 million that we're asking. So with that in mind, the other parts, I just want to make note is everything I see in the remaining ask is twofold. One, what we could have achieved last year, but because of COVID, we zeroed out our budget. Actually, we didn't just zero it out, we went negative. We gave some back. And you know, COVID being what it is, I hope the public can recognize that moving forward with the third largest municipal budget and the second largest school district in the state, that we added nothing last year is an amazing concept in and of itself. And now the problem with that is it's not a realistic budget. There are things we needed to do last year that now have compacted into this year, into what we need to also do this year. And so when we're looking at realistically about $1.5 million of ask with those regards, the bulk of those fall for the most vulnerable students, taking care of the most vulnerable students in the district. With programs ranging across that line. So moving forward in the discussion of the budgets, I really just want the council to know, and I want the public to know, that there's an awful lot that we need to do, and this is a good start. It's not going to be like this every year moving forward. We've discussed this on the finance committee of a good outward 5-year plan so that we're able to nullify those peaks so that, you know, the public's not getting hit every year, but rather this a lot of this is result of not doing what we should have done last year. And quite frankly, from a personal note, I don't think budgets for the past 5 years for the school department have reached the level they should have reached to address issues. Now, granted, we're taking care of the public, taking care of the taxes, but I end with this. I'm one of these, I love data. I just immerse myself in it. Certainly my history in Auburn, I showed, I will dig down and dig into the data. Right now, the city of Lewiston, tax-wise, is at the national average. So if people want to come forward and say, well, we need to reduce taxes, or, you know, we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of where we're at as a community. And that can be substantiated by the National Association of Realtors, the Census Bureau, and one demographic tool I love to use is Sperlings. And I encourage the public to go to those to understand that yes, a $3,000 tax bill, which is the average in Lewiston, is a lot of money to pay. But the thing is, everybody in the United States is paying that amount of money, and that is the cost of municipal government. And we have to address, if we're going to have a school department, we need to finance it, and it's not going above and beyond to ask for this kind of figure when we have to handle what we have to handle. And one big piece I think that needs qualification is remedial. These kids lost a year of education. I mean, we did the best we could. We threw everything we could at them. No matter what, there's been a slip. And going forward, we don't want to take away from anything that allows us to address the remedial education that they're going to need. I'll stop there.
I know Mr. Physick has to leave in 15 minutes. Were there any comments you wanted to make before you have to go?
No, I actually believe it was a pot. I just think you really can't, you know, put a price tag on education. Those we have to, and I just think that this was, you know, thoughtfully carried out. And you know, I was on the school board 5 years ago, but I would agree with him that we are making up some of those mistakes here. So I hope that we don't get they come back and ask another $1.5 million or $2 million off of it, because we're at times, you know, sometimes we got to spend money, and I really don't think you can put a price on improving a kid's education. We're coming back from where we've come from. So.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said so far. Most especially Member Vogelon, who has delivered the best message I've heard from this committee in a long time. You know, I have total support for what's in this budget. What concerns me is what's not in it, and I understand that that's going to be difficult for folks, and we'll obviously go through the process. But I do want to draw both committee members' attention and the public's attention to a particularly salient line, and Superintendent Lang was clearly thought it was relevant because he bolted it. And that is that this budget, as proposed, does not meet the needs of our learners. And that's with all of the increases that Member Potvin just talked about. We are still falling short of what students need. So, you know, we need to fight like hell for what's in this budget. And we need to consider looking at some of those other items and working with the superintendent to identify what are the places where we could potentially get this budget to meeting the needs of our learners. But if it's a choice between, you know, cutting somebody's tax bill and supporting our students, I think we should support our students every day and twice on Sunday. There's no question. Our job is to support students and to support education.
Mr. Damon and then Ms. Wright.
Jake, I know that part of what happened last year was stating the assumption that there were significant savings to be made out of the special ed budget. Realize that just didn't happen, and that's going to be a time-consuming process to get to that. Does this budget reflect any projected savings out of that special ed report that we got?
So this budget does reflect numerous reductions in vacancy positions that the audit in part found, some efficiencies. So that's a large part of that, over $500,000 in cuts to current positions that typically carry forward. Is derived from that more in-depth conversation around the special ed.
Ms. Ryan. Alicia, you can go ahead.
Sorry, I sometimes can't hear folks. Okay. Superintendent Langley's, are the council materials the same exact as what the school committee has received?
So the only thing that they would have in their packet would be the overview memo that I shared today.
Okay. I'm just thinking about, given member Beauplant's question and thinking about the best ways forward. So I think telling the full story and spending the time on education with the city council is a worthwhile effort always. You know, how many times have I said to you all, like my brain just doesn't compute at this point in the pandemic. And so I think a reminder of the ask of the school department last year to really take that, I think, what was it, like a 40-cent hit in our budget because we were getting COVID relief funds in a way that the city wasn't, was something that administration chose to do, and we stuck with it. But it makes this year look really tough when this year has contractual increases. It brings us back to the level of spending from prior to COVID hitting. And then it has really meager stuff built in. And I think it might become more robust as we go through the process. But I think that education point is going to be incredibly important. I was trying to look up very quickly and see, I haven't heard anything about revenue sharing from the state yet, but it might just be that they're keeping it the same, and that's why there's no news on that front. But you know, if the state decides to increase that through the appropriations process, then that might help us a little bit more on the city side, and that trickles down to the school side. I was going to say this as part of my council report later, but we're also looking at a city revaluation in assessing. So that might also have an impact. I mean, it wouldn't be completed, but it's just like a future looking conversation that I think will get wrapped up into this as we work with the council. But it's really helpful hearing folks' like first impressions and first questions, so that when I do talk to the council tomorrow night, in case they do have any questions about the direction that this committee is heading, it sounds like this level of funding or more, rather than not this level of funding and less. So that's a helpful indication. And if folks want to reach out to their counselors or to me, feel free to throughout this whole process. I will be doing my best to balance both and represent both interests as truly as possible, but also get my own viewpoint in there for my constituents. So thanks all.
Yes, I just wanted to piggyback off of Mr. David's question about the audit that we had, the savings, and you mentioned that we cut some positions that weren't being filled. But you also mentioned that currently substitutes and ed techs, or who were filling those positions, right? Ed techs and
Yeah.
substitutes, which they're not the most qualified to teach some of our most vulnerable students. So I'm not sure that's a good savings that we're looking at. So I just want us to keep that in mind as we're going through this process.
So one of the things that Bobby and I share is the incredibly pessimistic viewpoint on finances, period. I'm the person that when a bill is drawn out of my account, when I don't actually see the money leave, I call the company and ask them, why did you take your money? I hate to bet that something's gonna happen again. kind of like that person that always lives in that 3 month probationary period of job. I never trust anything until I actually see it happen. I'm really thankful for the funds we're getting from the government to help with things. There's a part of me that's just screaming about what we're gonna do next year. Because we're stuck, the building is leaning and we're stuffing branches underneath it to hold it up. And I'm not sure all those branches are all that sturdy. That's the visual that comes to mind when I think about some of the things we're saying COVID will cover that. It won't cover it next year. And I know our taxpayers, and I'm one of them, don't want to pay. It's a hard ask. But if we don't, things are going to go downhill really quick. Summer school is something that we know benefits our students in a way that's hard to quantify, but very clear to see. Some of the other things that we're not funding, we know our students need. It's not a want, it's not this would be nice, it's they need this. And I would just ask that the people that worry excessively about their tax bill, think about the people that not paying taxes is impacting. In this case, it's students who aren't getting the supports they need. Those students are going to grow up to be all sorts of people in our society, whether it's the personal care assistant that comes in to help you after you break your hip, or the person who comes in to help you with your medication when you start to get dementia and your family has to work to take care of themselves and can't help you. These are people that are very vital in the long run. But if you don't support them as they're coming up, they can't fill those needs. This is why education is so important from beginning to end, not dropping people in the middle, not, oh, they'll catch up. Because we know after this year, catching up is going to be a long haul. It's not going to be a one and done. It's going to be a step by step, year by year, build up to get them where they need to be. This is not, I have a hard time being okay with this, but I know it's what we've had to do so far. I would love to see the community hear some of this and be like, wait a second, we can't not fund these things. We need those things and actually rally, but I'm pessimistic. I've heard the comments of people complaining about their tax bill. And it hurts because I know the people that are being hurt by that. I mean, we know them. We're the school committee. We see these kids. We see their parents. They're the future of our city, and we're saying, nope, they don't need that, when we know that they need that. So I just, anybody who's watching or listening, just please look a little deeper.
Any other comments or questions?
How will the budget format unroll? So do we have an actual schedule of what we're taking up each day?
Yeah, so on Wednesday, we'll be looking at Article 1 and Article 5, which is regular instruction and student supports. Principals and directors are completing one-page memos, if they haven't already, to just express the things that they put forth. And they are familiar, they may not know every line, but they're familiar with this memo. They know that a lot of things they've asked have been pulled off the table. They also know that we've had some tough conversations over the last couple of weeks saying, what vacancy do you have right now that you could find a way if you had to? And those are those very items that we're seeing for that. So, administrators will be around on Wednesday, either in person or by way of the screen, and can answer any questions you have about their respective positions.
Yeah, along the same lines in terms of procedural, but in terms of considering changes to this budget in any possible direction, do we want to do that as we go, or do we want to do that in a sort of final meeting, the revision meeting, I think was there? I guess that's a question for both the superintendent.
parking, we called it the parking lot in the past, where as we discussed things, we said we want this added to the parking lot. I think Bobby maintained that list, and then at the end, we went back and reviewed all of those items.
Yes, so my recollection on that last year, and with the caveat that obviously last year's budget process was a bit of a mess, was that we never returned to those items, we never voted. And this is actually an even bigger concern for me. I don't think we'll have this problem with the superintendent. But last year, the budget was adjusted without votes. So I think that this is what we're starting with. We've got a book for it. You know, any reductions, any additions, any changes need to be votes of the school committee. So that any changes to what we have in this binder are reflective of our collective decision. And then at the end, obviously, an up or down vote on what we've arrived at the end of the process. But I just remember being very irritated to see changes made to the budget without affirmative school committee votes last year.
Last year's process was not how it normally is.
Okay.
I'm so glad.
And please know that the amount of transparency that we have is fully intentional. In fact, there's some things in here that I don't think you see in other places, including the items that we pulled out.
Yeah.
I think sometimes those things just get omitted and say, you know, we took care of it, so you don't know what those things were. That principals, directors that said, hey, we really need these things. Just wanted you to have that context. I will say that there'll be things that Bobby, Karen, or I will pick up on, like, oh, that thing isn't in here, or that's not the right spot. So we'll have some light corrections like that. But at no point in time are any of the three of us interested in a process like you guys mentioned. I think it's critical that the support of communities, those add-ons, especially for further reductions in places like that.
I have a question for Alicia, if she doesn't mind. Do you think it would be helpful for the city council to have a copy of Jake's memo?
I'm going to volley a question towards the superintendent first. Are you planning to meet with the council?
Yes.
I mean, I tried to call the city administrator before this to catch up with him and make sure those plans were moving forward and get a better understanding of that, but he wasn't available. So I think
I've been in communication with
okay.
the administrator. I have not set a time to be in front of the council. There's at least a couple of things I'd like to talk to them about. One of them, probably an executive session that I think might be important to share with them. So.
Yeah, so I think that interface time is going to be really important. If this memo, I'm sure this memo should go to the city council. I would agree with that, but I think we haven't done our work yet to arrive at a more clear number, Member Hawkins. So, you know, it might be a little weird to serve up, you know, 146 as the number now, and then have that possibly be an entirely different number, whichever way it goes in the future. I think the best things that could probably happen in communicating effectively is I will keep interfacing the best I can. I think the superintendent and the chair representing at those meetings will be incredibly important. And then trying to connect with your ward partners. I will say there's the benefit of, you know, 2 former school committee members sitting on that dais, and then myself trying to do my best. So it's a slightly more advantageous position than in the past, but I think keeping up that education is important.
Remember, Ray, you start the budget process on the 18th of March. We have our school presentation to them on the 22nd. Do you think I should be doing something, the general proposal beforehand, other than communication?
Sorry, I need that one more time.
You mentioned I should probably try to get in front of the city council. Should I be doing that before the 18th when they start talking about budget?
If you can, I would. I think given the COVID environment, you know, it's going to be a lot harder for me to just pull someone aside after a meeting and say, hey, what are your concerns? Those sorts of things. I'm going to do my best to reach out to everyone. and try to take a temperature check and see if there's some real pressure points. But I think if you as the superintendent could be before the committee, before the council, before we look at our side of the budget, it will put you in the most advantageous position. If that doesn't happen, then I don't think it's going to be a huge issue, but stating our case first is going to be better.
And for members of the committee, my vision of this cycle is that the overview that I just shared is kind of a live document, and as the work happens here, I will make appropriate adjustments there, and then when we do present to the committee in full, it'll be the modified version of this initial document so that you'll be familiar with that presentation.
So, is it possible that we can start having coffee provided here on budget nights? We've always had it when we had it at Dingley. It was very helpful.
That's because we had Tom. And Tom
I know
was
we
always
didn't
there.
have Tom.
Oh, yeah, yes, I second that.
That's why I talked
That'd
about
be
this.
great.
I know it's not dire need to, but,
I'll third that.
all right.
Just, Jake, I think this, what we're going through, what we certainly have gone through this past year. I think when we meet with the city council, this is a moment where I think we need to be able to look at it as such an important moment that we need to be together live in this room. We've had as many as 50 people. Having the city council with us is not going to tip us over the top. And there's going to be, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of particular issues. And for me, I will shut off the computer if I've got to do this by Zoom. It's the most aggravating thing in the world. And if we're talking about a $94 million budget, we need to be sitting here at these seats, face to face.
So I've already reached out to the city administrator about that, and they are not meeting in person currently at all. And so the feedback that I got was that the 22nd, looking at kind of projecting out when we do that presentation, that it would be virtual.
We would be in person, but they would
We
be
can be in
virtual.
person, but they would be using the protocols. Remember, Ray, I don't know if they've agreed to that, if that's been.
So what I was going to contribute was that through the city administrator, it was kind of a email put out into the world about our preferences, and the counselors who I've seen reply all, at least for our plan to attend via Zoom. I think part of the concern is, and we've run into this in the room sometimes, is you can't hear other folks when they're masked sometimes. And so it's sometimes easier to be on Zoom for that. We have been running all of our meetings via Zoom, and they've been pretty productive that way. It's just, I think there's some hearing concerns, which I think are completely valid. And then also it's a different demographic of folks on the council. So it will not be all in person. I can promise you that.
Agenda item number 9, the report from the city council representative.
I feel like I've had a lot of screen time already, so I'll try to keep it brief. Last Tuesday, we met on the revaluation workshop. We also talked about permit fee schedules, and we got an update from the housing committee weighing in on the homeless solution recommendations that were presented a couple weeks prior. We meet tomorrow night. We will be talking about a couple real estate issues, including mill number 5, just a brief option extension while some work gets done, a Bates Mill TIF district, and then Ray's Op is also presenting to us about real estate option.
Thank you. Agenda item number 10, report from the school committee chair. The equity statement did wrap up last week, which I had suggested it may do the following day. The committee, the City Spirit Committee presented the equity statement to the Auburn City Council tonight, and we'll be presenting it to the Lewiston City Council tomorrow night. For, I believe for a vote, but I'm not sure if it's just a discussion or a vote. Ms. Ray is saying no, just discussion.
It's just in workshop tomorrow night.
Great. That's all I have.
Will they be eventually coming here?
I think we're trying to have discussions about when that will happen, how to fit that in. Agenda item number 11, report from the superintendent.
I don't have a lot to share. I talked a lot tonight. I guess I would share that I can't thank Karen and Bobby enough for the work that they had to put into this initial step budget proposal. And to echo the equity statement work that's happening, we do have an equity resource team here in Lewiston that's working on the very same thing. And so I do see a bit of a meshing of things as it all comes together. I do think the school department wants to continue to move forward with that effort as well. So aligning to what we shared earlier in that slide, that July 1st piece of really having a plan around equity for our district and having the pieces in place. And I think we're in a good spot to do so.
Agenda item 12, school committee and community announcements. No. Oh, that's right.
Thank you. So I was lucky enough to join the Lewiston Youth Advisory Council on Friday afternoon. Their Light in the Dark series of photo essays has been, they worked with Rink Advertising for a display downtown, and also a partnership with Healthy Androscoggin to do this project. The youth on that council are incredible. They each took time to take a photo of what life in the pandemic looks like for them, and sources of comfort and familiarity, and wrote up some beautiful pieces that are on display. So if you're heading downtown to support a business for takeout, definitely stop by Rink. It's displayed in the windows. It looks incredible. So hopefully folks get a chance to look at that.
I do want to mention too, the state has come out with some more housing, some more funding around housing. Everybody's been struggling with that as far as renters or landlords go. Certainly go to Maine Housing Authority site. There should be links there to it. The way it works is the funding goes to the landlord rather than to the tenant. So if a landlord has a tenant that's behind, I think the ability is there. I don't know the program myself, but I think the ability is there to apply for back rent. So that may help some of our landlords who are struggling, and certainly help keep less people off the street.
To follow up on that, Community Concepts is actually managing that for Lewiston now. Previously, it was being bounced back and forth between general assistance and Community Concepts was covering it for some areas and not others. But now will be processed and managed entirely through Community Concepts for Androscoggin County, Monster County, and the city of Brunswick.
Also, Trinity Jubilee Center, they usually do what's it called, empty bowls supper. They can't do that last year or this year because of the pandemic. They have, I can't remember what it's called, but they have another program going where you buy a meal and part of it supports meals for the shelter. Certainly go to their site. The information will be there. It's just another opportunity to feed yourself and feed people who need help.
And Madam Chair, Superintendent, and you guys can take this from me. I spend a lot of time still talking with my counterparts in Auburn, and they found it fascinating that we had the discussion at special ed regarding outplacement, those out of district placements that we do. What was the number? 114?
116.
116, yeah. And Auburn is facing the same thing. With the concerns to try to get their kids back into the district. There seemed to be some interest in having the conversation between the two cities on a joint venture to try to create a program that could bring both our city's kids back into the community and not have to outplace them throughout the state. And what's our outplacement cost? It's massive. Astronomical. So it's multi-millions of dollars in both cities. So I think there's a vibe there and a touch. So as we talk about this, you can reach out to your counterparts and maybe get this discussion going. There might be an opportunity. Certainly, we're trying to do the same thing, and we're limited in our financing. How do we do this structurally? How do we do this systematic, instructional and so forth? And I think there's an opportunity for both of us to combine our resources to do something that will make a significant gain for both cities.
Are we still part of the regional, yeah, is that what it's called? I forgot.
Consolidated.
Bobby. Bobby, what was it called?
It's the regionalization thing that wasn't regionalization, right?
You're talking about the regional service center?
That's the thing.
We're still part of that, yes.
And we work with Auburn as well as other schools, correct?
That's correct. We haven't met due to the pandemic. It hasn't been an opportune time to do so, but yep, we're still part of that.
Primarily to find ways to consolidate things, services and stuff like that to save money for the district. So it sounds like a good place for this to go.
Yes, that's the intent.
Mr. Madeira's calling to give your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really like the department's idea of collaborating with Auburn and something like that. I think that's the kind of solution that could actually make this work. Because bringing back outplaced kids is so difficult because of the level of services required and the initial costs to get the facilities and set everything up and hire the staff and training. It just seems like something that could be much more manageable and possible. The two cities collaborate, so I really like that.
You're just full of great ideas
I'm doing all right.
and information tonight. We're behind you, man, behind you.
Mr. Damon?
I think that hopefully, this is on YouTube, this is broadcast, the newspaper is carrying it. Hopefully, the city council will be aware of our 1.4 million rate budget request without having to see this. Hopefully, they're paying attention to what we're doing. I'm hopeful that this won't come as a shock to them when they finally get to start.
Agenda item number 13, future agenda items.
I've got some pending, I'm good to wait.
All right, agenda item number 14, to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Ward 2 is absent. Ward 3?
Yes.
4?
Yes.
5?
Yes.
6?
Yes.
7?
Yes.
City council?
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1?
Yes.
Motion to adjourn, passes 6-0.